Welcome to Cosmic Wand. Today's adventure. Every Veela in France sensed Harry's power and Fleur fought her family to claim him first. If you haven't already, smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Now let's begin. Chapter 1. The Pulse. Harry Potter had learned to read a crowd the way other boys read the back of a cereal box, and the campsite at the Quidditch World Cup was the most legible thing he had seen in years. He sat on the steps of the Weasleys' borrowed tent with a tin mug going cold in his hands and watched 100,000 witches and wizards fail to pretend they were ordinary. A man across the field had conjured a chimney onto his canvas and was now arguing with it. A clan of small witches kept their tents staked with what looked like enchanted toffee. Somewhere down the row, a wireless played the same bouncing march for the fourth time, and 3 children marched in a circle to it, perfectly serious, until one fell over and the other 2 kept going. Harry catalogued the exits without deciding to. 2 clear lanes between the tents to the east, one choked with guy ropes to the west, the standpipe path north that everyone used and therefore the worst route if anything ever went wrong. He did this the way some people hummed. Privet Drive had taught him that a room with one door was a trap and a house with no allies was a kind of whether you survived rather than a place you lived, and the lesson had outlasted the house. He no longer expected to need the exits. He counted them anyway. It cost nothing, and the one time it mattered would pay for all the times it didn't. "You're doing it again," said Ron, dropping onto the step beside him with an armful of something Fred had sworn was breakfast. "Doing what?" "That thing where you look like you're about to be marked on it." Ron handed him a sausage wrapped in a slightly burnt pancake. "Relax, it's the World Cup. Nothing bad happens at the World Cup. Dad says the ministry's got it locked down tighter than Gringotts." Harry took the sausage and did not say that he had heard a great many confident sentences in his life and that the confidence had never once been load-bearing. He liked Ron too much to make him feel stupid for being happy. That was a thing he had decided about deliberately, because he decided most things deliberately. Ron was generous and loyal and bad at suspicion, and a person could carry the suspicion for both of them without resenting it. It was a fair trade. Most of Harry's friendships were trades he had run the numbers on and chosen to keep. "Tighter than Gringotts," Harry repeated. "Gringotts has been robbed. Once. Once is the only number that matters with vaults." Ron threw a bit of pancake at him and Harry let it bounce off his shoulder, and for a while the morning was genuinely good. That was the part he would remember afterward when he tried to be honest with himself about the day, that for a few hours he had simply been a boy at a festival, and that the simplicity had been so unfamiliar it felt like a borrowed coat. He had not had to be clever. No one had wanted anything from him. Hermione argued with Percy about cauldron bottom regulations until both of them were pink, and Ginny won a spinning charm off a stall and refused to tell anyone how, and the twins vanished and reappeared with money they would not explain, and Mr. Weasley walked among it all glowing like a man who had been let into a country he loved. By evening the whole encampment was moving in one direction, a slow bright river of green and red flowing uphill toward the stadium, and Harry let himself be carried in it. The stadium itself was the first thing all day that genuinely impressed him. It had been sunk into the moor and hidden from Muggle eyes, 100,000 gold-tiered seats wrapped around a field that glowed under its own enchanted light, and the noise of the place hit him like a physical front when they came out of the tunnel into the top box. He had been high before on a broom in the cold and the quiet. This was different. This was the sound of more people in one place than he had ever stood among, all of them wanting the same thing at once. "Blimey," said Ron very quietly, and for once Harry had nothing sharper to add. The match, when it came, was the finest thing he had ever watched, and he barely watched it. He tried. Crumb was extraordinary. Harry could see it even from the box, the economy of the boy. Every movement the shortest possible line between intent and result, no flourish, no waste. Harry respected that more than the dazzle of the Irish chasers, who were brilliant but spent 3 motions where one would do. If he ever played Crumb he would lose, and he found he could think that without it stinging, which was new. Knowing the shape of a thing you couldn't beat was its own kind of advantage. You stopped wasting strength pretending. But before the players came out, the mascots did, and that was when Harry first learned that there were forces in the world his mind could not simply file and dismiss. The Bulgarian team had brought Veela. They came onto the pitch as 100 women, or as something wearing the idea of 100 women, and they began to dance. Harry felt it the instant the music started, not in his ears, but lower, behind the sternum, a tug like a hook set in a part of him he had not known was reachable. The whole stadium went over at once. A roar that had been about Quidditch turned into a different roar entirely. Beside him, Ron had risen halfway out of his seat with an expression of tragic, total devotion, and was beginning slowly to climb onto the railing of the top box as if he meant to walk out across the air to them. Harry watched the tug. That was the only way he could describe it afterward. The pull was real, current with a direction and a strength he could measure, and he stood inside it and observed the current as he would observe a strong wind, noting which way it wanted to take him and not going. It was not that he felt nothing. He felt the whole shape of it, the lovely insistent wrongness of a desire that had been installed rather than grown. And underneath that, in the place the hook had set, something in him simply declined. He had spent 11 years learning to want nothing he had not first decided to want, because wanting things you couldn't have was a tax the Dursleys had collected daily, and he had quietly, totally stopped paying it. Whatever the Veela reached for in a man, that thing in Harry had been spent long ago. He took hold of the back of Ron's jumper and pulled him down off the railing without looking away from the pitch. Wah, Ron blinked, sat down hard, and went scarlet. I was just, I know, Harry said. It's all right, it's not you. Across the box, Mr. Weasley had gripped the front rail with both hands and was holding himself in place by main force, jaw set, and several ministry men were openly weeping, and a portly official 2 seats down had begun shredding his program into confetti and showering it on his own head. The Veela danced, and the stadium adored them, and Harry sat in the eye of it and felt the strangeness of being the one still point. He did not enjoy the feeling. It marked him as different, and being different had never once in his experience been free. Then the dance ended, and the Veela's faces flickered. For half a second 100 beautiful women showed something with a beak and scales and a hard golden eye, and the stadium exhaled and remembered the score, and the match resumed, and Harry filed the entire episode under a single conclusion that he would have cause to revisit before the night was out. It doesn't work on me. He thought it without alarm and without pride. He thought it as one notes that one happens to be colorblind to a particular shade. A fact about his own equipment, useful to know, probably never important. Ireland won. Crumb caught the snitch and lost the match in the same motion, and Harry understood the logic of it completely. Crumb had seen that his team could not close the point gap, and had chosen to end the game on his own terms rather than let it be ended on someone else's. It was the move of a person who would rather decide his own defeat than be handed his own victory. Harry watched the Bulgarian seeker spit blood and bow to the crowd and thought, with a flicker of something close to kinship, there is a person who refuses to be managed. He had no way of knowing how soon the thought would matter, or that it would not be about Crumb. They came down out of the stadium in the great river again, hoarse and happy, and the camp at midnight was a roaring constellation of bonfires and song. Harry lay in his bunk listening to the Irish celebrating 3 fields over and let the noise hold him up, and somewhere in the warmth of it he fell asleep without meaning to, which was rare for him. He had trained himself to fall asleep on purpose, as he trained himself in most things. The fact that the World Cup had stolen it from him without permission was, he would think later, the last gift the good part of the night gave him. He woke because Mr. Weasley was shouting, and Mr. Weasley did not shout. Get up, Harry, get up, all of you, now. There was light through the canvas that should not have been there, the wrong color and orange that moved. Harry was out of the bunk and into his shoes before he was fully awake, and he had the door flap open before the others had found their feet, because some part of him had been waiting for this since the moment they arrived, and the waiting paid for itself now in seconds. The camp was burning. Not all of it, not yet, but a column of tents to the west had gone up, and against the fire moved a crowd that was not running away from it but with it, a knot of perhaps 24 figures in black robes and silver masks, marching in formation through the panic they were making. Above them, dragged into the air on nothing, 4 people turned and tumbled and screamed, a man, a woman, and 2 small children. The smallest, no more than a toddler, spun upside down so that her nightdress fell over her face and she clawed at the empty air. The marchers laughed and made them dance. The Muggle campsite manager and his family, Harry understood in one cold instant, made into a toy, made into a show. The fear came up in him like cold water, and he stood in it and did not let it move him. The same trick he had used in the stadium, except that there was nothing lovely about this current, only a black undertow that wanted him to run with all the others into the dark where anything could be waiting. Into the woods, Mr. Weasley was shoving them, counting heads. Stick together, I have to help the ministry go, all of you, Geo. And then it was the 4 of them in the running dark, Harry and Ron and Hermione and Ginny. And then it was 3 because the crowd took Ginny sideways in a surge and Ron went after her swearing. And then it was Harry and Hermione, and then a tree root and a stranger's shoulder and a scream took Hermione one way and Harry the other. And then it was just Harry alone in a wood full of running people and green light. He stopped running. He made himself stop, which was the hardest single thing he did all night, because every animal part of him wanted to keep moving, and he had learned that the animal part of him was usually right and occasionally catastrophically wrong, and the trick was knowing which night it was. He pressed his back to a tree and breathed and counted, and the counting steadied him as it always did. Running blind in a dark wood was how you ended up alone with the thing you were running from. Better to stop, to see, to choose a direction instead of being chosen by the crowd. He saw the wand on the ground first, then he heard the child. She was small, 5, perhaps 6, and she had got herself wedged into the cleft of 2 roots and gone silent in the way that frightened children go silent, past crying into a held, shaking stillness, eyes enormous. Separated like him, lost like him, except that she was 5. Harry crouched in front of her and pitched his voice low, and even the voice he used on spooked things, because he had learned on Privet Drive that a calm voice was the cheapest spell there was and worked on more creatures than most real spells did. Hey, I see you, I'm not one of them. He showed her his empty hands. I'm going to get you out all right, what's your name? She didn't answer. Behind him, through the trees, the green light was getting closer, and with it the laughing. Doesn't matter, Harry said. You don't have to talk, you just have to come with me. Can you do that? He reached for her, and that was when one of the silver-masked figures broke through the brush 10 feet away and saw them. Afterward, Harry would try many times to reconstruct exactly what happened next, and he would never entirely succeed, because the thing that happened did not happen in the part of him that kept records. The masked figure raised a wand. Harry saw the motion begin, the backswing of a curse, the same economy of intent Crumb had shown, except aimed at a 6-year-old and the boy in front of her. He had perhaps a quarter of a second. He knew several spells. None of them were fast enough, and he knew it, and the knowing was the worst part, the cold, clean certainty that he had run the numbers and the numbers said too slow. And something in him that had been shut since before he could remember simply, finally, opened. He had thought of his magic, when he thought of it at all, as a thing he reached for and used, a bucket lowered into a well, drawn up by the armful when he needed it. He had been wrong about the depth of the well. He had been wrong as a man standing on the shore is wrong about the sea. What opened in him in that quarter-second was not a bucket. It was the floor of the well dropping away into a dark that had no bottom he could feel, and through the hole came a pressure that was not fear and was not anger, that was older and flatter and more total than either, that wanted only one thing, which was for the danger in front of the child to stop existing. It came out of him as a single soundless beat. There was no light. That was the thing the survivors all agreed on afterward, the ones near enough to feel it. There had been no flash, no bang, nothing to see. There had only been a moment when the air over half the campsite went taut as a struck drumhead and then released, a pulse that passed through tents and trees and people like a tide passing through reeds, bending everything one way and letting it spring back. The masked figure 10 feet away was picked up off the ground and thrown 30 feet into the dark, his curse discharging harmlessly into the canopy. He did not get up. Harry stood over the child with his wand still in his pocket and his hands still empty, and felt the well close again slowly, like a wound deciding not to bleed. He was shaking. He had done that. He had no idea how he had done that or what precisely he had done, except that the pressure had gone out of him in every direction at once and the world had flinched. Okay, he heard himself say to the child in the same calm voice, because the calm voice was all he had left. Okay, we're okay, come on. He got her up, he got her moving. He carried her when she couldn't walk, and he found a ministry witch with a glowing wand and a list of missing children, and he handed the girl over and gave a name that was not his because he did not want to be a name on anyone's list tonight. And then he walked back to the Weasleys' patch of churned grass on legs that did not feel like his, and he sat down in the dark and waited for his friends, and he told no one what had happened in the wood. He did not have the words. More than that, he had a precise and unwelcome understanding that whatever had come out of him was the most important fact about himself he had ever discovered, and that important facts about himself had a way of being used against him, and that the first move in any game where you held a powerful piece was to not let the other side learn you held it. So he sat in the dark and shook and said nothing, and when Ron and Hermione found him, he let them think the shaking was ordinary fear, and in a sense it was. He was wrong about one thing only. He believed he had told no one. He had told everyone who could hear. 40 miles to the south, in the director's enclosure the French ministry had reserved for its delegation, Fleur Delacour came up out of a half-sleep with her heart slamming and her hands gripping the arms of her chair, and for one disoriented moment she did not know where she was or why every nerve in her body had just been struck like a bell. The enclosure was nearly empty. Her father had stayed late at the stadium with the others, talking and drinking and being important, and Fleur had retreated here an hour ago to be away from the noise, because crowds did to her what they did to all of her kind. They pressed in, they wanted, and the wanting was exhausting in a way she could never make wizards understand. She had been dozing in a deep chair by the cold hearth, half listening to the distant roar of the camp, almost at peace. Now she sat rigid in the dark and shook, and she did not understand it, and Fleur Delacour was not accustomed to not understanding things about herself. She was 17 years old, and she had been beautiful her entire life, beautiful in the specific way her grandmother's blood had made her, which was less a fact about her face than a force she carried, a pressure she put on every room she entered. She had learned young what it did to people. She had learned to use it and to hate using it and to despise, just slightly, almost everyone it worked on, because a thing that worked on everyone told you nothing true about anyone. She had spent 17 years being wanted and had concluded, somewhere around 14, that being wanted and being seen were not only different but nearly opposite, and that she might go her whole life without being the second thing even once. She had never, in all of it, been the one who wanted. That was the part she could not understand, sitting in the dark with her heart going like a snared bird's. Something had reached out of the night and taken hold of her, the one who did the taking, and wrung her like struck crystal, and what it had wrung was not desire, not exactly, nothing so small and warm as that. It was recognition. As if a note had sounded somewhere out in the burning dark, a single low pure tone pitched to a frequency she had not known she was tuned to, and everything in her had answered before her mind could ask permission. She rose. She crossed to the tall window and looked north, toward the glow on the horizon where the camp was, where something was clearly, badly wrong. She could see the wrong color of the fire from here, could hear now that the distant roar had changed its character, was no longer celebration. And she stood at the glass with her palm flat against the cold pane, and felt the last of the note fading out of her like the final ring of a bell you have struck and then caught with your hand, and she thought, with a clarity that frightened her more than the fire did, that was a person. Somewhere in that dark, in that danger, someone had done something, had reached down into a depth she had not known a person could have, and touched it, and the touch had gone out across the world and found her where she sat. Not aimed at her, that was the thing she understood and could not yet bear to examine. It had not been aimed at anyone. It had simply been so much, so deep, so far past the ordinary bounds of what a wizard was, that the part of her that listened for such things had heard it as you hear a great bell from miles off, not because it is calling you, but because it is too large not to be heard. Worthy. The word arrived in her like a stone dropped into the well of her, and she recoiled from it, because it was not her word, it was the enclave's word, it was the old word, the instinct word her grandmother spoke and her mother half spoke, and she had spent her whole life refusing to let speak in her. The blood had a vocabulary all its own, ancient and certain and utterly without regard for what Fleur Delacour the person might actually want, and that vocabulary had exactly one word for what she had just felt, and the word was mate. No, she said aloud to the empty room in French, the way you talk back to a dream. The note did not return. But the memory of it sat in her now like an ember in dry grass, and she knew, with the same certainty she had felt at the window, that it would not go out on its own. She had felt the deepest thing she had ever felt, and it had not been her choice, and it had come from a stranger she could not see in a fire she could not reach, and every principle she had built her life on stood against caring about any of it. She cared anyway. That was the unforgivable part. When her father came back 2 hours later, disheveled, furious, full of the riot, the dark mark in the sky, the disgrace of British security, he found his eldest daughter sitting bolt upright by the dead hearth, pale as the moon, and he stopped in the doorway with the news dying on his lips. "Fleur, you are ill. What is it?" She looked at him. Sébastien Delacour was a handsome, exacting man who loved his family as he loved his career, which was to say completely, and as an extension of his own design, and she loved him and trusted him with everything except, she was discovering in this moment this. "It is nothing, Papa," she said. "A bad dream. The fire frightened me." It was the first time in her life she had lied to her father, and she did it cleanly, and she watched him believe her, and she understood that she had just made a decision she had not known she was making until she heard herself make it. Whatever that note had been, whoever had sounded it, she was not going to hand it to him. Not to him, not to her mother, not to the enclave, not yet, not until she understood it. Not until she had seen the person it belonged to with her own eyes and decided herself what it meant. She did not know that she was already too late to keep the secret, because she was not the only one who had heard. The enclave kept no clocks. Time in the high stone hall in the Pyrenees was measured the old way, by the turning of the long shadows across the floor and by the slow exhalations of the fire pit at the center, and so it was difficult afterward to say exactly when the disturbance reached them. But the old ones felt it within the same hour, and one by one they came up out of their rooms and their reveries and gathered in the hall without being called, because a thing had happened in the world that none of them had felt in their lifetimes, and not one of them needed to be told to come. Seraphine, eldest of them, who had been matriarch since before the Grindelwald War and looked it not at all, sat last into her place by the fire and let the others settle, and waited until the youngest of the council had stopped pretending she was not trembling. "You felt it," Seraphine said. "It was not a question. All of us felt it." This was Ondine, who sat at Seraphine's right hand and had wanted the center seat for 40 years, and whose voice carried a hunger she did not bother to hide tonight. Every daughter of the blood from here to the sea felt it, matriarch, a core, a true core, breaching in the open in front of the whole world. Her eyes caught the fire. "I had begun to believe the old accounts were exaggerations. A worthy one," they said. "Once in 5 generations," they said. "I thought it a story we told ourselves to keep the young ones hopeful." It was no story. Seraphine looked into the fire and saw in it the long arithmetic of her people, the slow centuries of careful breeding and quiet alliance and patient decline, the blood thinning generation by generation as worthy mates failed to be born among the wizards, as the great core stopped breaching, as the daughters of the line married well and married wisely and married down, a little every time. A people did not die all at once. A people died like this by inches, by good sensible compromises, until one day the fire that had made them was only a warmth they remembered, and then in a burning field in a foreign country the fire had answered. Where, said Ondine. Who? Britain, said one of the others. The Quidditch ground, it could be nowhere else. A British wizard. Ondine's lip curled and her eyes shone in the same instant, contempt and appetite at war in her and appetite winning. Then we must move before the British learn what they are sitting on. If a corps like that is allowed to fall into some ministry's hands, into some bloodline's keeping, by accident, by chance, it will not be chance. Seraphine's voice did not rise and the hall went quiet for it. Whoever holds that corps holds the future of every daughter we will ever bear. You understand me, not a marriage, not a season's romance, the future. A corps like that bonded into the line and we are reborn. Lost into another's keeping, and we are what we have been becoming, a beautiful memory. She turned her ancient eyes on the council one by one. So we will not leave it to chance. We will find the one who breached. We will learn everything, and we will bring him into the blood by whatever means the blood requires. And the Delacours, Ondine said softly, and Seraphine did not miss the calculation in it, because Ondine never spoke a name without a reason. Apolline's eldest was at the World Cup. With her father on the ground, a stillness went through the council. The girl is a champion now, Ondine went on into the stillness, her voice gone smooth as poured oil. Beauxbaton's champion for the tournament at the British school. She will be among the British wizards all the year, closer than any of us could arrange in a season of trying. She spread her hands. If the worthy one is at that school, and where else would the ministry put a wizard of that power but in their own halls, watched, then we have a daughter of the strongest line we possess already inside the walls. It is almost as if the blood arranged it. Seraphine looked at Ondine for a moment, and in that moment a great many things passed between the two old women that the younger council members would not understand for months. Fleur Delacour, Seraphine said, is the proudest girl this enclave has produced in 100 years and the least biddable. You propose to make her our instrument. I propose, said Ondine, that the blood has already made her our instrument, and that it would be a kindness to tell her so before she discovers it herself and does something foolish out of pride. She smiled. She felt it tonight. I would stake my place at this fire on it. She felt it stronger than any of us because she is the strongest of us. The question is not whether Fleur Delacour will go to the worthy one. The blood will take her there whether she wills it or no. The question is whether she goes as our daughter with the enclave's purpose in her hands, or as a girl in love, alone with no one's purpose but her own. The fire spat. Seraphine watched it. Send to Sebastian Delacour, she said at last, quietly. He is an ambitious man, and ambitious men are easily made into doors. We will want him open. She rose, and the council rose with her. And send word also that I want to know everything there is to know about every wizard who stood on that Quidditch ground tonight, every name, every face. I want the worthy one's name before the British know they have lost it. She did not see, none of them saw Ondine linger after the others had gone, alone by the fire, turning something over in her hands and her mind, a calculation that had nothing to do with the future of the blood and everything to do with the future of Ondine. A corps like that was not only a hope for a dying people. A corps like that, in the right binding, harnessed rather than wed, was the kind of power that could make a single witch the equal of any matriarch who had ever sat by this fire. The blood wanted the worthy one married. Ondine had begun, very quietly, to want him used. She would need help with that, the kind of help that did not come from the enclave. But Ondine had old correspondents in old families in the south of France and across the Channel, families whose names the council did not say aloud, and one of them in particular had written to her not a month ago about corps and bindings and the interesting question of what could be done with great power if one were willing to take it rather than be given it. She put the thought away and went up to her room, and the fire burned down and the enclave waited, and far to the north a boy who had told no one his secret lay awake in a churned field believing himself, for one more night, unknown. At dawn the British ministry's curse-breakers worked the western edge of the camp in grey light, and Sebastian Delacour walked the line with them as the courtesy his rank required, half listening, composing in his head the scathing report he would file on British incompetence. He stopped listening to himself when the senior breaker stopped walking. "This is wrong," the man said. He had his wand out over a patch of churned root and ash, and the tip of it had gone the color of a bruise. "These readings are wrong. Residue from the riot," said his junior. "Curses thrown all over this ground last night." "No," the breaker crouched. "Curses leave a signature you can read like handwriting. This isn't handwriting. There was a discharge here, one event. No incantation residue, no wand pattern, nothing cast, just an enormous undirected release like something let go all at once." He looked up, and there was unease in his face. "I've seen the aftermath of a wizard's core rupturing when they overreach and burn out. This is that, except the wizard didn't burn out. The core that did this is still walking around." Sebastian Delacour kept his face composed, because composure was the first skill the French ministry taught and the last it forgave you for losing. Inside, something had gone very still and very awake. A core capable of that here last night, and his wife's people had spoken to him only once of such things. In the low voices the enclave kept for the matters that mattered most, of worthy ones and of what a single great core wedded into the blood could do for a fading line, and for any man clever enough to be standing nearby when it happened. "Can you find the wizard?" he asked idly, a man making conversation. "Not from this." The breaker straightened, brushing ash from his knees. "Whoever it was, they're a needle in 100,000 by now. We'll log it as anomalous and move on, nothing to be done." "Of course," said Sebastian. "Anomalous, quite." He walked back to the French enclosure through the wreck of the morning with his report on British incompetence entirely forgotten, and by the time he reached it he had already written in his head a different letter to a stone hall in the mountains in the careful phrasing the enclave preferred. He did not yet know the wizard's name. But he was a patient man and a placed man, and his daughter, his clever, beautiful, biddable daughter, was about to spend a year inside the very school where the British would surely keep anything so precious close. The pieces were already on the board. Fleur Delacour had simply been the first of 3 powers to notice that the game had begun. Harry did not sleep again. He lay in the dark of the field with Ron snoring an arm's length away and Hermione murmuring in her own troubled sleep beyond him, and he ran the night through his mind as he ran everything through his mind, not to relive it, which was useless, but to extract from it the things that would still be true tomorrow. Fact, he had done something he could not explain and could not, when he tried, do again. He had reached for that depth a dozen times in the last 3 hours, lying here, and found only the ordinary well, the bucket and the rope, the same magic he had always had. Whatever had opened had closed, and it had opened not when he willed it, but when the child behind him was a quarter-second from dying. So, it answered to need, not to want. That was a problem. Power you could not summon was power you could not rely on, and power you could not rely on was, in a fight, almost worse than no power at all, because it tempted you to count on it. Fact, no one had seen it for what it was. There had been no light, no sound, nothing to point at. The masked man he had thrown would wake if he woke, with no memory of a curse and a sense that the wind had hit him. Good, he had kept the piece off the board. Fact, and this was the one he kept returning to, turning it like a stone he could not get comfortable in his palm. The Veela had not worked on him, and the thing in the well had felt, in the half-second it was open, related to that somehow. As if the same trait that made him deaf to the pull made him capable of the pulse. He did not understand the connection. He distrusted his own pattern matching here, because the human mind would find a face in any cloud and a story in any 2 facts laid side by side, and 2 facts laid side by side were not a story, they were a coincidence wearing a story's coat. He noted it. He did not believe it yet. He would watch for a 3rd fact and a 4th and decide when he had enough. What he could not have known, what no amount of cold, clean reasoning at the bottom of a dark field could have told him, was that the 3rd fact was already on its way to him, would board a flying carriage in 2 months' time and step out onto the grass at Hogwarts with silver hair and ancient blood and a question in her eyes she did not yet know how to ask. He turned over. Dawn was a gray rumor at the edge of the moor, and Hermione was awake. He knew it before she spoke by the change in her breathing, the particular stillness of someone deciding whether to say a thing. She had a mind he respected without reservation, which was rare, and a mind he respected was a mind he had to manage more carefully than any other, because it was the only kind that could catch him. "You're not shaking because you were scared," she said very low so as not to wake Ron. "You were scared, but that's not why you're still awake." "I'm awake because someone set a campsite on fire, Harry." In the half-dark her eyes found his, dark and certain. "I've seen you scared after the chamber in the hospital wing. You don't go quiet like this. You go quiet like this when you've worked something out and decided not to tell me." He considered, for one cold honest second, telling her. He ran it as he ran everything, the value of an ally who could actually understand the problem, against the cost of a secret shared, being a secret no longer his to keep. Hermione would not betray him, but Hermione would worry and act on the worry, and want to research it in a library where books had a way of being read by other people, and the piece would slip off the board the moment a second person knew it was there. "I worked out that the people who did this got away," he said, which was true and therefore the best kind of lie, "and that the ministry is going to spend a month deciding whose fault it was instead of who did it, that's all." She watched him a moment longer. He let her because looking away was the one tell he never gave. "All right," she said at last, in the voice that meant it was not all right and she had chosen, for now, to allow it. "But you tell me if it were something, you tell me." "I'd tell you," Harry said, and the ease with which the lie came was the first thing all night that genuinely frightened him. She turned over. He lay listening to her breathing slow into sleep and thought that he had just learned a second fact about himself to set beside the pulse, that he could lie to the cleverest person he knew and be believed, and that he liked himself slightly less for how useful it was going to be. "It doesn't work on me," he thought again, the night's one solid handhold. And then, because he was honest with himself even when honesty cost something, and I don't know what that makes me. He would find out. He always found things out. It was the only promise he had ever reliably kept to himself, that whatever the world declined to explain, he would in the end pry open and understand, even if he had to do it alone, as he had done everything that had ever mattered. He was not going to be alone. He had no way of knowing that either. But the gray light came up over the moor, and the camp began to stir, ash and ruin and the ordinary miracle of morning, and Harry Potter sat up and put on the face he wore for other people, and went to find his friends and pretend for a little while longer that he was an ordinary boy with an ordinary year ahead of him. The year ahead of him would be many things. Ordinary was not going to be one of them. Chapter 1 and Chapter 2, Beauxbatons arrives. The carriage came out of the sky like a decision someone had already made. Harry watched it from the front steps with the rest of the school, a powder blue coach the size of a house drawn by a dozen winged horses each the size of an elephant, and he found that the part of him that read arrivals for threat was unusually quiet. This was theater. Everything about it was designed to be seen: the gold trim, the height of the descent, the way the horses pulled up at the last instant so the whole apparatus seemed to settle onto the lawn like a crown lowered onto a head. People who arrived this way wanted you looking at the entrance and not at the exits. He noted that and went on watching, because theater told you what a thing wished to be, and what a thing wished to be was almost as useful as what it was. He had spent 2 months learning very little. He had read everything in the school library that touched on magical cores, which was almost nothing, because the subject was either considered too elementary to write down or too advanced to be permitted, and the few honest paragraphs he found agreed only that a wizard's capacity was fixed at birth, measurable in theory, never measured in practice, and not subject to change. None of which explained a well with no bottom. He had practiced alone on the nights he could get away, reaching for the depth that had opened in the wood, and found it the way you find a door you are certain was in a wall that is now blank. It did not answer to want. He had proven that to himself 100 times and stopped trying to disprove it. The power was real and it was his, and he could not summon it, and a piece you could not move on demand was a piece you had to plan around rather than with. He had not told anyone. Hermione watched him sometimes with a question she had decided not to ask again, and he was grateful to her for it and did not say so. They're enormous, Ron breathed beside him, as the carriage doors opened and a woman climbed down who was very nearly as tall as Hagrid. Look at the size of her. Look at Blimey, look at them. Harry looked. The Beauxbatons students came down out of the carriage in pale blue silk, a dozen of them, and a ripple went through the crowd of boys around Harry that he recognized at once, because he had felt it before in a stadium full of weeping men. It was the pull. Fainter here, diluted across a dozen students of mixed blood, but the same hook seeking the same place, and around him boys straightened and stopped breathing and forgot the cold, and Harry stood inside the current and felt it slide off him into the dark like water off oilcloth. And then the last student came down, and the current was no longer faint. She was perhaps a head taller than the others, and she moved as though the lawn had been put there for her to cross, silver blonde hair catching the torchlight, and the pull that came off her was not the diffuse warmth of the others, but a single focused note, and Harry felt it strike the place where the others, allured, glanced away and stop, not because it pierced him, because something in him turned to face it. He noticed the change in himself before he noticed her face. That was the part that made him careful. The allure was sliding off him as it always did. He could feel it sheeting away. But underneath the allure, beneath the manufactured wanting, there was a second thing, lower and quieter, and that second thing had lifted its head. He had felt it stir exactly once before in a burning wood in the half-second before the well opened. It was the part of him the pulse had come out of, and it had just very slightly woken at the sight of a girl crossing a lawn. He did not let it show on his face. He had a great deal of practice at not letting things show on his face. Across the lawn, climbing down last from the carriage, Fleur Delacour stopped as if she had walked into glass. She did not know which of them he was. That was the maddening thing, the thing that had ridden her for 2 months and ridden her hardest in this last hour as the carriage came down over the lake, and the note she had carried since the World Cup began very faintly to thrum. He was here. He was close. Somewhere in this sea of black robes and pink British faces was the person who had rung her like a bell from 40 miles off, and she had no idea which one. She had built theories all autumn. A great wizard, surely. A grown man, an auror, someone of weight and years to have a core like that. She had pictured him a dozen ways, and not one of the pictures had been a boy. She let her allure off its leash as she crossed the grass, not all of it, never all of it, but enough to sweep the crowd, because allure was a kind of sonar, and she had learned long ago to read the echoes. Every boy in range went soft and stupid in the predictable way. She read their faces as she always did, looking for nothing, expecting nothing. And one face did not change. He was small for the older ones and too composed for the younger ones, a dark-haired boy near the front with round glasses and green eyes that were, at this moment, looking at her with an attention that had nothing of the slack hunger in it that every other face wore. He was looking at her as she looked at other people, assessing, cataloging. And as her allure passed over him, she felt it do the thing it had never once done in 17 years of doing it to everyone. She felt it reach him and find no purchase, slide across him and away, as if he were made of a material her nature could not grip. And underneath that faint, low, unmistakable, the note. The struck bell tone she had carried from the World Cup, sounding now not from 40 miles off but from 20 feet, from behind a pair of round glasses, from a boy who could not be more than 14. It is him, she thought, and the thought had two halves and the halves did not agree. The first half was the blood, surging up in recognition, certain and exultant and frightening. The second half was Fleur Delacour the person, looking at a 14-year-old child and feeling the floor of every plan she had made tilt under her. She kept walking. She did not look at him again, but she had marked exactly where he stood, and she had seen the one thing that mattered most and made the least sense. Her allure had failed on him. The one weapon she had never needed to think about, the thing that made every door in the world open for her, simply did not work on the one person in the world her blood had chosen. Whatever else was true, she could not make him want her. If he ever did, it would have to be real. She found that she did not know whether that was the worst news she had ever received or the best. The letter from the enclave was waiting on her pillow the second night, delivered by an owl that had crossed the channel for the privilege, and Fleur read it twice by wandlight in the curtained alcove she had claimed at the rear of the Beauxbatons carriage, and then she sat very still with it in her lap. It was beautiful, as all the enclave's letters were. Seraphine's hand was old and exact, and Seraphine never wrote a word she had not weighed. The letters spoke of the long winter of the blood, of daughters born weaker than their mothers, of the fire going out of the line one careful marriage at a time. It spoke of how rare it was, how impossibly rare, for a true core to breach in the open, and of how the whole future of the people now turned, like a great door on a single hinge, on what became of the one who had breached it. It did not anywhere use the word duty. It did not need to. It said instead that the enclave rejoiced that the worthy one had been placed within Fleur's reach, that the blood had clearly chosen well in choosing her to carry its hope, and that the elders had every confidence she would understand what was being asked and rise to it as the eldest daughter of the strongest line they possessed. What was being asked, as though it were a request. At the bottom, in a different hand, Ondine's, she thought, the looping, confident hand of the elder who had always watched Fleur touch too closely, was a single added line. Do not let sentiment make you slow. There are others who would be glad of the honor if you find you cannot bear it. Fleur read that line a third time, and a cold certainty settled in her that was clearer than any of the letter's warm and beautiful sentences. It was not a reassurance. It was a threat wearing a reassurance's clothes. Secure him or stand aside and we will send someone who will. They were not asking her to fall in love. They were asking her to be the instrument that delivered a boy into the blood, and if she would not be the instrument, they had other instruments, and the boy's wanting did not enter into it anywhere. Fleur, the curtain stirred and a small face came through the gap, 8 years old, silver-haired, pillow-creased and sleepless. Gabrielle had begged for a month to be allowed to come to see the famous tournament, to watch her sister be a champion, and Maxim had relented because the child was no trouble and Apolline had wanted her watched within the family rather than left behind. You are still awake. What does the letter say? Nothing for little girls. Fleur folded it and made room, and Gabrielle climbed in beside her with the total ease of a child who had never once doubted she was wanted. Go to sleep. Is it about the boy? Gabrielle yawned. Mammon said there was a boy at the cup. She said you felt him. She said it without weight, the way children handle the enormous things adults whisper about as simple facts of the world. Is he nice? Fleur looked down at her sister, and something in her went very fierce and very quiet at once. I do not know yet, she said. I am going to find out. If he's not nice, you don't have to like him. No, Fleur agreed, I don't. And she understood, holding her sister in the dark, that this was the whole of it, the entire principle the enclave's beautiful letter had been written to erase. That liking was a thing a person did or did not do freely, and that no amount of duty or blood or survival could make it happen on command, and that she would set the carriage on fire herself before she let anyone, Seraphine, Ondine, her own father, teach Gabrielle otherwise by doing it to her. Sleep now, petite. Gabrielle slept. Fleur did not. She lay in the dark holding the folded thread against her ribs, and somewhere in the castle across the lawn the boy who was the cause of all of it was lying awake too. She was nearly sure, being careful in the dark in his own way, and she felt the note sound once low, and for the first time did not try to silence it. She only listened to it and thought, I have to see you for myself, before they decide it for both of us. I have to know what I am refusing to deliver. Harry did not get a proper look at the source of the note again for 3 days, and in those 3 days the world arranged itself to make a proper look impossible, because on the third night the goblet of fire spat out a fourth name, and the fourth name was his. He had not put it in. He knew he had not put it in with the particular certainty of a person who tracks his own actions closely, and so the only interesting question, from the instant the parchment left the blue flame and Dumbledore read it aloud and the great hall went silent, was who had and why. He stood up because not standing up was not an option. He walked the length of the hall through the silence and the staring as he had once walked the length of a stadium box through weeping men. inside the current, noting its direction, not going where it pushed. In the small room off the hall, the three real champions turned to look at him, and four adults began talking at once, and Harry stopped just inside the door and did the arithmetic while they argued over his head. Someone wanted him in this tournament. Someone competent. The goblet was an ancient and serious object, and fooling it was not a schoolboy prank. Someone who wanted him not dead, because there were 100 cleaner ways to kill a boy than entering him in a contest with medics and judges and a watching public. Someone who wanted him tested then, pushed, put in front of dragons and worse, in a place where the watching public would explain away any amount of strange power as the desperation of a boy in over his head. Someone wants to see what I can do, Harry thought, in the loud little room, with Karkaroff shouting about a fourth champion and a fourth school, and he went cold and steady, because that was a far more dangerous thing for an enemy to want than his death. An enemy who wanted him dead had a problem he could solve once. An enemy who wanted to measure him would keep coming back. He let the adults decide what they were going to decide. The contract was binding. He was a champion. There was nothing in the room for him but information, and he gathered it. How Karkaroff's anger was performed, and Maxime was real. How Crouch the ministry man recited the rules with a thin sheen of sweat on him that the warm room did not explain. How Moody, the new defense teacher, watched Harry with his ordinary eye while the magical one rolled and never once landed on anyone but Harry. He noted Moody and went on noting everything else and gave no sign that he had noted Moody at all. And he noted, too, the girl, Fleur Delacour, Beauxbaton's champion, standing by the fire with her arms folded, looking at the new fourth champion with an expression that was not the contempt the words coming out of her mouth would have suggested. "He is a little boy," she said to the room, to Maxime in a voice pitched to Carrie. "Surely this is a joke." It was a good line, and she delivered it well, and Harry watched her deliver it and understood three things in quick succession. First, she did not believe it. The line was armor. She had reached for the most dismissive thing available, which was the move of a person hiding something larger. Second, she had been looking at him before she spoke, and the look had not been dismissive at all. It had been the look of someone confirming a thing they already half knew. And third, and this was the one that made the back of his neck prickle, the place the note lived, she was the source of it. The lawn, the pull that turned to face him, the low tone that had stirred the well thing in his chest. She was Veela, or part of it, and the World Cup pulse had gone out into a stadium full of Veela, and a Veela champion had crossed an ocean and looked at him on a lawn as though she had been looking for him. Two facts laid side by side were a coincidence wearing a story's coat. Three facts were a story. He had told himself in the wood that he would wait for the third fact before he believed. The third fact had just called him a little boy in a French accent and was, right now, refusing to look at him because she had already looked too long. She knows what I am, he thought, or she thinks she does. And whatever I did at the World Cup, she felt it. She came here because of it. Or she came here for the tournament, and the tournament put her where she could find it. Either way, the one person at Hogwarts who knew the most dangerous fact about him was a 17-year-old girl who could make any boy in the castle do anything she wanted, and could not, he was nearly certain, make him do anything at all. That was not, he decided, the worst hand he had ever been dealt. It might even be a useful one. A person who could not be managed by your one great weapon was a person you had to deal with honestly, and honesty was a terrain Harry preferred because so few people were any good at it. He looked at her across the warm, loud room until she felt it and looked back one flat second before she remembered to be disdainful. In that second he let her see that he had seen her, not the allure, her, the watching, the armor, the line she didn't believe. Then Dumbledore was asking him whether he had put his name in the goblet, and Harry said no and meant it and was not believed by most of the room, and discovered that he did not particularly care who believed him as long as he understood who had reason to lie. The school decided he was a liar and a glory hunter by breakfast, which Harry had expected, and Ron decided it too, which he had not. That one cost him. Ron would not look at him across the dormitory, and the badges came out within a week. Potter stinks, glowing red, pinned to half the cloaks in the castle, and Harry walked through it all with the face he wore for other people, and did the cold arithmetic that he always did when something hurt, which was to ask what it changed. It changed that he was alone in a way he had not been since before Hogwarts. Hermione stayed, fierce and constant, and he was grateful for her past the point where gratitude had words. But Ron's absence left a gap shaped exactly like the easy, unsuspicious friendship that had been the one place Harry never had to be clever, and the gap did not close, and Harry learned again the old privet drive lesson he had let himself forget for 3 good years, that the safest number of people to depend on was a number you could afford to lose. He found, examining the wound the way he examined everything, that it made the conversation he had not yet had with Fleur Delacour matter more, not less. He distrusted that. A man who has just lost a friend is a man primed to overvalue the next person who treats him as a peer, and he knew it, and he watched himself for it. But the fact remained, in a castle that had decided he was a cheat, the one person who looked at him and saw something true was a girl he had exchanged perhaps 40 words with, and his own analysis kept arriving, against his preference, at the same place. and there was Moody. The defense lessons were the best Harry had ever had. The man taught the way a soldier teaches, no comfort in it, all of it useful, and that was precisely what made Harry careful, because a man that competent did not let his magical eye rest on one student for whole minutes at a time by accident. Twice Harry caught it, the swivel in the lock, the false eye fixing on him through the back of the man's own skull, through walls, while Moody's ordinary face was turned the other way. Once after a lesson, Moody had stopped him at the door and looked him over with both eyes and said, "You don't flinch, Potter. Most boys flinch. You want to know why I find that interesting?" And Harry had said, "No, sir," pleasantly, and left, because the one thing you never did with a man who was studying you was let him see that you had noticed you were a specimen. 3 powers, Harry thought, walking the corridor with a Potter Stinks badge flaring on a passing third-year's chest. The girl's family and their enclave, whatever it was, who wanted him for blood, and someone here who had put his name in a cup of fire to watch him bleed in public, and the second one, the watcher, did not feel like the first. The blood people wanted him alive and whole and married. The cup person wanted him tested to destruction. Those were different appetites, which meant different hands, which meant the board was more crowded than even Fleur knew. He did not have enough to act on. He had enough to be ready. He made himself ready, and he waited for the girl with the silver hair to come and find him, because everything he understood about her told him that she would. She came on the 5th day by the lake, which told him she had watched long enough to learn that he went there alone. He heard her before he saw her, which was its own kind of information. She had chosen to be heard, a girl who could move silently, choosing the courtesy of a warning. He did not turn around. He was sitting on a flat rock at the water's edge with his knees drawn up, and he let her cover the last of the distance and stop a careful 2 yards off, upwind, where her allure would carry to him and he would have every chance to be affected. A test, he understood. She had come to test the thing she'd seen on the lawn. "It does not work on you," Fleur said. No accent-thick performance now. Her English was precise when she wasn't using it as a weapon. She searched for the word she was willing to give him. "My nature, the thing I do without trying, it does not touch you." "No," Harry agreed to the lake. "Why, I don't know." It was the truth, and he gave it to her plainly, because he had decided on the walk to the lake that morning that he would not learn anything from this girl by lying to her, and that she was almost certainly the only person at the school he might learn something from. "It's never worked on me. The World Cup Veela didn't touch me either. I assumed I was broken in some specific way, and it would never matter." He turned his head and looked at her then a carriage landed, and I found out it might. She came around the rock and stood where he could see her, and up close, without the allure doing its work, because it wasn't working, because it had nothing to push against. She was simply a tall girl with tired eyes and a jaw set against something, and Harry found her far more interesting than he had on the lawn, because on the lawn she had been a force, and now she was a person, and persons could be reasoned with. "You felt something on the lawn," she said. "Not the allure, something else. I saw it." She studied him. "Tell me what you felt." "You first," Harry said. "You crossed an ocean. You looked at me before I'd done anything. You called me a little boy in a voice that didn't believe it. You came to a lake you'd had to watch me for days to find. You're not here because I'm Beauxbaton's competition." He kept his voice level, the cards going down one at a time, face up, because face up was how you forced an opponent to show you whether their hand could beat what you'd already laid out. "You're here because of the World Cup. You felt something that night from 40 miles off or wherever you were." A note. He watched her face when he said it and saw the word land. "I'll tell you what I felt on the lawn the moment you tell me whether I'm right about that." For a long moment she said nothing, and the lake lapped, and a single gray heron lifted off the far shore and beat away over the water. "You are not what I came here expecting," Fleur said at last. It was not an answer, and it was a complete answer. "I expected a man, someone old, powerful in the way old things are powerful. I built him very carefully in my head, the person who did what was done that night. He was never a boy with whatever it is you have." Something moved behind her eyes, anger and bewilderment, and underneath both, the thing she had crossed an ocean carrying. "Yes, a note. That is exactly the word. I have not had a quiet hour since. Because of me. Because of whatever you are." The correction was instant, and it told him she had been making it to herself for 2 months. "Do not flatter yourself, Potter. I do not know you. I felt a thing that night that my people wait 5 generations to feel, and most of them die never feeling, and it came from you, and I have come to find out what you are, and that is all this is." She lifted her chin. "You are a fact I have to understand, nothing more." Harry looked at her for a moment, and then, to his own mild surprise, he laughed not unkindly, a short, real laugh, the first honest sound he'd made in days. "What?" she said dangerously. "Nothing." He shook his head. "You just described me to me, word for word, a fact I have to understand, nothing more." He met her eyes. "That's how I've thought about you since the lawn, so at least we're being honest about what this is." And there it was, the thing he had not expected and could not have planned for, the thing that made him sit up a little straighter on the rock. She had been braced for him to be afraid of her, or to want her, or to grasp at the importance she carried. She had not been braced for him to recognize her. 2 people who looked at the world as a set of facts to be understood, meeting across a lake, each having traveled a long way to understand the other, and each refusing on principle to pretend it was anything warmer than that. It was the most seen Fleur Delacour had felt in her entire life, and the person doing the seeing was a 14-year-old British boy her own magic couldn't touch, and she was furious about it, and she could not look away. "Tell me what you felt on the lawn," she said again, quieter. "Something woke up," Harry said. He had decided to tell her this too because she had given him the note and a trade was a trade. "The same thing that happened at the World Cup came from a place in me I can't reach on purpose. It's been shut since the wood that night. It doesn't answer when I call it." He looked at the water. "It answered to you on the lawn just a little. It lifted its head. I don't know what that means and I don't like not knowing." He turned back to her and his voice went flat and certain, the voice he used when he was drawing a line he would not let be crossed. "And before you say anything else, I know what you are roughly, and I know that your people wait 5 generations for whatever I am, and I can do arithmetic. Somebody somewhere is already deciding what's to be done with me. Your enclave, your family, maybe your ministry. I felt the shape of it the morning after the World Cup, and I've felt it tightening since the goblet." He held her eyes. "So I'll save us both some time. I'm not a bloodline asset. I'm not a prize. I'm not a thing that gets secured or claimed or brought into anything. Whatever's been arranged about me was arranged without me, and it doesn't bind me, and the first person who tries to collect on it is going to learn that I am a great deal more expensive than I look." Fleur went very still. Because he had just said, almost word for word, the thing she had been screaming inside her own head for 2 months. The thing she had not been able to say to her father or her mother, or the careful letters that had begun arriving from the enclave. He had named the cage before she told him there was one. He had no idea how completely he'd just described her own life, the lifetime of being wanted and arranged and valued for a thing she'd had no say in being born with. "You think I came to collect you," she said slowly. "I think someone sent you, or someone will, or someone thinks they sent you whether they did or not." Harry's voice gentled by a fraction, which for him was a great concession. "I don't think it was your idea. You don't look like a person executing a plan. You look like a person who got hit by a truck 2 months ago and walked all this way to find out what a truck is." She laughed before she could stop it, one startled note, and pressed her lips together at once as though to take it back. "That," she said, "is the rudest accurate thing anyone has said to me in years. I'll take accurate." She sat down. She had not planned to sit down. She sat down on the far end of his flat rock with 2 feet of cold stone between them and looked out at the lake, and Harry let the silence be, because he had learned that the most valuable things people told you were the things they told you in the quiet after they'd decided you weren't going to push. "My family will try," she said finally to the water. "I will not lie to you because you would know, and because I am tired of lying about this to everyone. My father has already written to the enclave. The enclave has already written to me. They do not say collect or secure, they are too elegant for that, but that is what they mean. A core like yours into the blood by marriage is the difference between my people living and my people becoming a sad, beautiful story told by the few who are left." She turned her head and looked at him, and for the first time there was no armor in it at all. "They are not wrong that it matters. That is the part you do not understand yet. It is not greed. It is survival, and they will not care, any of them, what you want or what I want, because the blood does not care, and the blood is older than either of us." "And what do you want?" Harry said. She looked at him as though he had asked the one question no one had ever thought to ask. "I do not know yet," Fleur said, "but I know what I will not do." Her chin came up and the force came back into her, not the allure now but the person, which was a great deal more formidable. "I will not hand you to them, whatever you are. I felt you first and strongest, and they want to make that mean that you belong to my line to be delivered like a dowry in the wrong direction. I will not be the one who walks you into that. If they want you, they can come and try to take you, and they will find that you are right, that you are very expensive, and they will find that I am standing in the way." She seemed to hear herself, and her eyes widened a fraction, as though the words had gotten ahead of the decision. "Not for you, I do not know you, for me, because I am done being a thing the blood arranges, and if I will not be arranged, I will not arrange anyone else." Harry looked at her for a long moment. "That," he said, "is the first thing anyone said to me in 2 months that I actually believe." The heron came back across the lake and settled in the reeds, and the two of them sat on the cold rock and watched it, 2 people who had each crossed a long distance to understand the other and found, instead of an asset and a champion, the unexpected and unwelcome fact of an equal. Neither of them said anything else for a while. Neither of them needed to. They had established the only thing that mattered, which was the terrain, that whatever was coming for Harry was real and competent and old, that Fleur knew its shape better than he did and would not serve it, and that the two of them, for entirely separate and entirely selfish reasons, wanted exactly the same impossible thing to not be owned. It was not friendship. It was not the warm thing the blood wanted it to be. It was an alignment of interests between 2 careful people, which was, in Harry's considerable experience, a far stronger foundation than affection and far rarer. "I have to win this tournament," Fleur said at last, standing, brushing stone grit from her robes. "It is the only thing I came here to do that is mine. Do not get in my way." "I didn't enter it," Harry said. "I'm trying to survive it. Our interests don't conflict. They might, then we'll renegotiate." He stood too, Delacour. The thing that woke up on the lawn, if your people know what I am, do they know how to control it, make it answer on purpose? She studied him, and he saw her weigh it, the cost of giving him a true thing against whatever advantage the truth might hand him. They might, she said, the old ones would know, the accounts would know. She turned to go and then turned back, and there was something in her face he would think about for a long time afterward, the first crack in the armor that was not anger. Be careful what you ask them for, Potter. My people have wanted your kind of power for 1,000 years. They will be very, very glad to teach you to use it, and then they will own the only person who knows how you were taught. She held his eyes. If you want to learn to use what you have, learn it from someone who does not want to keep you. Is there such a person? Fleur Delacour looked at him across 2 yards of cold lakeshore and did not answer, because the only honest answer was one she was not ready to give to him or to herself. She walked back up to the castle, and Harry watched her go, and felt the low note in his chest sound once quietly of its own accord as she crossed out of range, a struck bell, fading, and underneath it the cold, clean click of a piece moving on a board he was only beginning to see the edges of. He had come to the lake to gather information. He had gathered more than he'd hoped and less than he needed, which was the usual yield of an honest conversation. He knew now that he was hunted, by whom in general and for what. He knew the most dangerous person at the school could not be turned against him by her own greatest weapon. And he knew that she had drawn a line in the same place he had, for her own reasons, which meant that for as long as those reasons held, he was not alone. For as long as those reasons held, he was careful, even now, even pleased, to put it exactly that way. Alliances were trades, and trades held only as long as both parties profited, and he would be a fool to mistake an alignment of interests for a thing that would protect him when the interests diverged. He would be a fool, he thought, watching the silver head disappear through the castle doors, to start hoping the interests didn't diverge. He noticed that he was hoping it anyway, and that the noticing did not make it stop, and he sat back down on the cold rock and considered this new and inconvenient fact about himself with the same attention he gave to everything, and could not for once decide what to do about it. Chapter 2 and Chapter 3. The enclaves claimed they had his name within a month and his face within 6 weeks, and by the time the first snow fell on the Pyrenees, the council of the enclave knew more about Harry Potter than Harry Potter would have believed any stranger could learn. Seraphine read the dossier through twice in the firelight of the high stone hall, and when she set it down her hands were not entirely steady, which had not happened to her in a great many years. It was not the power that moved her. She had expected the power. It was the rest of it, the orphanhood, the long neglect written between the official lines, the boy who had survived the Dark Lord as an infant and a basilisk at 12, and 100 small daily cruelties no record troubled to name. The accounts had always said a worthy one would be made hard, because a core like that did not breach in the comfortable and the cherished. It breached in those who had been pushed to the edge of themselves and found a floor under them that should not have been there. She had read the old stories as a girl and thought them a romance. Now there was a boy, 14 years old, in a British castle, who had been pushed exactly that far, and the fire of her whole dying people turned on him like a compass needle. He is everything the accounts promised, Undine said from her place at the right hand, and more biddable for it, I think, in the end. A boy with no family is a boy hungry for one. We need only offer him what no one ever has. You have read the same pages I have, Seraphine said, and drawn the opposite lesson from them. A boy who has been failed by everyone who should have held him does not hunger to be held. He learns to need no one, and he is right to, and he will smell our offering for what it is before the words are out of our mouths. She turned to the fire. This one will not be coaxed. He cannot be compelled. You have seen the reports. The allure breaks on him like surf on a stone. So he must be persuaded by someone he comes to trust slowly on terms he believes are his own. There is exactly one daughter of the blood placed to do that, and she is the one least willing to be told to do anything. Then she must be made willing. She must be made to understand. Seraphine's voice had an edge in it now. There is a difference, Undine, and the difference is the whole of what separates us from the wizards who think the allure is the best of us. We do not make our daughters willing. We are not the cage. We have spent 1,000 years being the thing the wizards fear we are, and we will not finally become it in the hour the blood is saved, or there will be nothing left worth saving. She let that sit in the hall, and the younger members of the council looked at their hands. Fleur Delacour will be told the truth, all of it plainly, the stakes, the chance, what it means and what it costs, and then she will choose, because she is the strongest of us, and the strong are the ones you must trust to choose rightly, or you have learned nothing from being strong yourself. It was a fine speech, and Seraphine meant every word of it, and she was old enough to know as she made it that fine speeches were what you said in the hall before the fire, where there was time, and that the hour was not going to leave them time. The petitioner was admitted then, and it was Sebastian Delacour, come over the mountains in person, which told the council how badly he wanted what he wanted, because a man of his rank did not leave his ministry for a week to bow in a cold stone hall unless the prize was large enough to be worth the bowing. He bowed beautifully. He spoke beautifully. He laid out in the careful phrasing of a man who had built a career on saying ambitious things in modest words, the case that the worthy one and his eldest daughter should be joined, for the good of the blood, of course, first and last for the blood, but also, he let the council infer it rather than say it, for the good of a French ministry that would very much like such a corps married into a French line rather than a British one, and for the good of a house of Delacour that would, in the joining, become the first family of the enclave for a generation. Seraphine watched him through it all, the handsome, exact face, the genuine love for his daughter woven so seamlessly into his ambition for her that the man himself could no longer have told you where the one ended and the other began, and she thought, here is the doorway Ondine wanted opened. An ambitious man, already half persuaded he is acting from love. Push the girl harder than we ever could, and he will call it her future, and he will not see what he is doing until it is done. Your daughter, Seraphine said when he had finished, has not yet agreed. My daughter, said Sebastian Delacour, is 17 and clever and a little proud, and she will understand her duty when it is explained to her by the people she respects. He inclined his head. I would take it as a great kindness, matriarch, if the enclave's wishes were made clear to her. Coming from you they carry a weight that coming from her father they do not. He smiled, the smile of a man asking for help moving a stone he was certain ought to be moved. She loves the family. She will not want to be the one who let the blood die out of pride. And there it was, laid on the table by the girl's own father, the lever, not love offered but guilt held in reserve, be the daughter who saved her people, or be the daughter who let them die. Seraphine looked at the lever and disliked it, and understood, with the weary clarity of great age, that whether she touched it or not, it now existed, and that Sebastian Delacour would pull it whether the enclave sanctioned it or no. It will be made clear to her, Seraphine said, which committed the enclave to nothing and the father to everything. And Sebastian Delacour bowed again and went away satisfied, and did not notice, because men in a hurry to win never noticed, that the oldest power in the room had just declined to do the thing he asked while letting him believe she had agreed to it. When he was gone, Ondine lingered, as Ondine always lingered. You will lose her, Ondine said softly to the fire. Fleur spoke prettily of letting the strong choose, but you have met the girl, she will not choose us. She will hear all of it, the stakes and the cost, and she will look at the boy who cannot be compelled and decide that since he cannot be compelled, neither can she, and she will set herself against the whole of it out of that pride you admire so much. And then where is the blood, matriarch? Where is your fine speech, when the one daughter placed to save us decides her own freedom is worth more than the survival of her people? Then we will have raised a daughter strong enough to weigh her people's survival against her own freedom and choose for herself, said Seraphine. And if that is what destroys us, we will at least be destroyed as something other than slavers. Good night, Ondine. Ondine bowed and went up to her room and did not sleep. She sat at her writing table with a single candle and looked at the letter she had not yet sent, the letter to the old correspondent across the channel, and she weighed Seraphine's fine speech against the cold arithmetic that Seraphine, for all her age, refused to do. Seraphine would let the girl choose. The girl would choose freedom. The blood would die. And Ondine, who had given 60 years to this hall and watched the fire dim and never once sat in the center seat she had earned twice over, would die with it. A beautiful memory among beautiful memories, having held power her whole life and never once been allowed to use it. There was another way. There had always been another way. The accounts hinted at it in the passages the matriarchs liked to skip. A worthy cord did not have to be wed to be used. It could be bound. Taken into a working rather than a marriage, harnessed rather than honored, made to answer to a castor will instead of a wife's love. The old matriarchs had called it abomination and struck the method from the teaching, which Ondine had always thought was exactly the kind of thing the comfortable called the methods that frightened them. A core like the potter boy bound into a working, the witch who held that binding would not need the center seat. She would be able to take it. She would need help. The binding was beyond her alone, beyond anyone alone. It wanted dark and exact knowledge that the enclave had thrown away, and that only certain old wizarding families had kept. And it happened that one such family had reached out to her first, a month before the World Cup, when no one yet knew there was anything to reach for, a courteous letter from a man named Gaspard Rosier, who had heard, he said, that the enclave kept old accounts of cores and bindings, and who wondered whether a scholar of his particular interests might be permitted to consult them. She had thought it nothing at the time, a dabbler and antiquarian with a dark name. Now she understood it differently. Now it looked like the blood arranging things, exactly as it had arranged Fleur into the castle, except that the blood, in its wisdom, had arranged a second path, and left it to Ondine to be wise enough to take it. She dipped her pen and wrote. Gaspard Rosier kept his appointments precisely, which was the first thing about him that Ondine respected and the last thing about him she should have trusted. They met in a hotel particulier in the old quarter of a city neither of them named in writing, in a room hung with tapestries that ate sound, and Ondine, who had spent 60 years being the most formidable person in any room she entered, found within 10 minutes that she was, for the first time in her life, the second most. He was not what she had pictured. Not the gaunt theatrical darkness of the families who had followed the Dark Lord into ruin. Rosier had survived that war by being too useful to too many people to be worth arresting, and he wore his survival the way a duelist wears an unmarked face as proof of skill. He was perhaps 50, courteous, soft-voiced, with the still attention of a man who never said the second thing while the first thing was still telling him something. He poured wine he did not drink. He let Ondine talk and listened, and when she had laid out as much as she meant to lay out, the worthy one, the core, the British boy, the dying blood, the binding the accounts hinted at, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said the thing that told her she had found exactly the partner she needed, and made exactly the mistake she would not live long enough to regret. "You have described," Gaspard Rosier said gently, "the single most valuable object in the magical world, currently sitting unguarded in a Scottish castle, believed by its owner to be a curse. He turned the untouched wine by its stem, and you have come to me to ask whether it can be bound. Madame, I have spent 30 years studying nothing else. The binding of a great core has been theorized for centuries and attempted, to my knowledge, 4 times, each by a fool who did not understand the prerequisites and each of whom died of the attempt in interesting ways." He smiled. "I understand the prerequisites, which are 3. He held up a long finger. "The core must be alive and willing, or alive and unguarded. A core defended by its owner's full attention cannot be taken. Only a core caught open in sleep, in distraction, in the moment of some great expenditure when its keeper has, however briefly, stopped holding the door. A second finger. The working must be performed by a hand that the core's owner does not perceive as a threat, because a threatened core closes, and a closed core cannot be bound. The binder must be, at the moment of binding, the last person in the world the boy fears. A third finger. And the boy must be brought to the binding ground willingly, or carried there caught open, because such a working cannot be done at a distance and cannot be done in a struggle." He lowered his hand. "You see the difficulty. And you see, I think, the solution, or you would not have written to me, because the solution is standing in the same castle, wearing your blood, trusted by the boy, and currently, I am given to understand, in the process of deciding she would rather die than deliver him." Ondine went very still. "You are well informed," she said. "I make it my business." Rosier set the wine down. "Here is what I propose, madame, and I will be plain with you because you are a serious person and serious people do not enjoy being managed. You want power within your enclave, I want the core. These wants do not conflict, which is the only sound basis for an alliance. You cannot bind the boy, you lack the knowledge. I cannot reach the boy, I lack the access, and any move I make against the famous Harry Potter brings down the British Aurors, the headmaster, and a great deal of attention I have spent 30 years avoiding. But between us," he spread his hands, "you have a daughter of your blood beside him, and I have the working that turns proximity into possession. We need only arrange for the girl's resistance to become useless, and for the boy to be caught open, and for the binding to be done by a hand he does not. After which, madame, you will hold a witch's share of the greatest core in the world, and your matriarch's center seat will be a small thing you take at your leisure, and I will hold the rest, and we will neither of us trouble the other again." It was a beautiful offer, and it was a lie in exactly one place, and Ondine, clever, proud, 60 years starved for the use of her own strength, did not look for the lie, because the offer flattered the part of her that had stopped being able to imagine being deceived. The lie was the division. Gaspard Rosier had no intention of sharing a core that could not by its nature be shared. A bound core answered to one hand or to none. But he had learned long ago that the fastest way into a fortress was to convince someone inside that you and they wanted the same thing, and the fastest way to convince them was to let them believe they had thought of it first. "How do we make her resistance useless?" Ondine asked. "2 ways, and we shall pursue both." Rosier refilled the glass she had emptied. "First, a rival. The girl resists because she believes she is protecting his freedom. Give her a competitor, another suitor, sanctioned by the enclave, pressing a claim of his own, and her resistance turns to rivalry, and a girl fighting a rival for a boy is a girl who has already accepted that the boy is a thing to be won. She will fight to keep him from the other, and in fighting she will deliver him to us because she will be too busy guarding the front door to notice us coming through the back." He let that land. "Second, should the slow way fail, there is always the fast one. The boy is a champion in a tournament designed to put him, at scheduled intervals, in mortal danger, exhausted, his core wide open, his defenders scattered, before a crowd that will explain away anything. The tournament was made for our purpose by someone, madame. I did not put his name in that cup, and I would dearly like to know who did, because whoever it was wants the boy caught open as badly as we do, and an unknown ally with the same aim is a thing a careful man watches very closely indeed." He had said the one true and unguarded thing of the evening, and Ondine, intent on her own ambition, did not hear how much it cost him to say it, or understand that Gaspard Rosier was, at that moment, more afraid of the unknown hand in the Scottish castle than he was of anything the enclave could do. "We are agreed, then," Ondine said. "We are agreed," said Gaspard Rosier, and lifted the untouched wine at last and did not drink it. 200 leagues to the north, the worthy one was sitting alone in an empty classroom at 1 in the morning, failing. Harry had found the room in his second week, a disused storeroom on the 4th floor that no map of patrols passed near, and he came to it most nights now, after the castle had decided he was a cheat and gone to sleep on the decision, and he tried to open a door inside himself, and he could not. He had a method. He always had a method. He had reconstructed, as exactly as memory allowed, the conditions of the 2 times the well had opened. The stadium, where the allure had slid off him and the well had stayed shut, and the wood, where the child had been a quarter second from death and the well had dropped away into the dark. The difference was need, not fear. He had been afraid 100 times since without a flicker of the depth, not anger. Need, the specific airless certainty that something he could not allow was about to happen and that nothing in his ordinary reach was fast enough to stop it. The well answered to that and to nothing else, and Harry had spent 6 weeks discovering that you cannot manufacture that certainty on purpose, because the part of you that is manufacturing it knows it is a drill, and the well is not fooled by drills. He tried anyway. He stood in the cold dark and reached for the floor of himself and found, as ever, only the ordinary well, the bucket and the rope, the competent, unremarkable magic of a competent, unremarkable 4th year. He lit the lamp with it. He moved a chair across the room without touching it. He held a flame steady on his palm for a count of 200, all of it real, all of it solid, none of it the sea. A piece I cannot move on demand, he thought, lowering the flame. The most powerful piece on the board, and I can only watch it move itself. He understood the danger of it perfectly. The first task was 3 weeks away. If he walked into it counting on a thing that answered only to genuine mortal need, he would be counting on the task being lethal enough to trigger it, which was a plan that worked only if it nearly killed him, and a plan that worked only if it nearly killed you was not a plan. It was a wish wearing a plan's coat. The door opened without a knock, and Harry had his wand up and the lamp out before the hinges had finished moving, and Mad-Eye Moody's magical eye glowed in the dark like a coin at the bottom of a well. "Jumpy," said Moody, and came in and shut the door and did not light the lamp. "Good. Boys who aren't jumpy don't make old age." He lowered himself onto the edge of a desk with a creak of his wooden leg, and both his eyes, the dead one and the spinning one, settled on Harry. "Question for you, Potter. What's a champion doing in a locked storeroom at 1 in the morning with the lamp off, sweating like he's run a mile, when there's not a thing in this room but dust?" "Couldn't sleep, sir." The magical eye did not blink because it could not, and it did not waver. "Try again. You were practicing, and whatever you were practicing you weren't getting it, because a boy who gets what he's after doesn't look the way you looked when I opened that door." He leaned forward and his ruined face caught the moonlight from the high window. "I've been watching you since you walked into that hall, Potter. Don't bother telling me you haven't noticed. You noticed the first day, and you've been very careful since to let me think you hadn't, which is exactly why I find you interesting. So I'll make you an offer, one professional to another, and you can do with it what you like. Whatever you're trying to reach in here at 1 in the morning, I might be able to help you reach it." And there it was, the second power, the Watcher, the hand that had put his name in the cup, sitting on a desk in the dark, offering to teach Harry to open the very door that everyone in the world apparently wanted opened. Harry kept his face still and ran it cold and fast. A man this competent did not offer to help out of kindness. A man this competent, who had been studying Harry for 2 months and had almost certainly arranged to have him in this tournament, wanted the door open for reasons of his own. And an enemy offering to teach you to use your greatest weapon was an enemy who had decided that your weapon, once trained, would serve his purpose and not yours. "That's generous, sir," Harry said. "What would it cost?" Moody barked a laugh, short and genuine. "There it is, there's the boy who survives." He stood, the wooden leg taking his weight. "Nothing you notice yet. Constant vigilance, Potter. That's the whole of my teaching, and it's free. But I'll give you one lesson tonight at no charge, because I think you've half worked it out already, and it'll save you breaking yourself on it." His ordinary eye held Harry's. "Whatever it is you're reaching for, it won't come for a drill, will it? You found that out. It only comes when it's real." He limped to the door. "So stop trying to call it. You can't. The thing you've got doesn't answer to a boy who wants to use it. It answers to a boy who's about to lose something. Remember that when the dragons come." He opened the door, and "Potter, get some sleep. You'll need your wits more than your power, and your wits are the part you can actually rely on." He was gone before Harry could decide whether the advice had been help or bait, which was, Harry understood, precisely the point. A true thing offered by an enemy was the most dangerous gift there was, because it bought trust at no cost to the giver, and a man who would give you a true and useful thing to buy your trust was a man who intended eventually to spend it. Dragons, Moody had said dragons. The first task, 3 weeks off, a secret the judges were keeping, and Mad-Eye Moody had just dropped the word into the dark as casually as a man flicking a coin, watching to see whether Harry would catch it. Harry caught it. He did not let Moody see him catch it. He sat in the cold dark a while longer, and then he went to find the one person at Hogwarts he could check it against. Fleur was at the lake before dawn, which did not surprise him because he had learned that she came here for the same reason he did, to be in the one place where no one wanted anything from her. "Dragons," Harry said by way of greeting, sitting down on the cold rock at a careful distance. "The first task, tell me if I'm wrong." She went still, and then she let out a breath that fogged in the gray air. Where did you hear that? From a man I don't trust, which is why I'm asking you. He watched her. He's right then. Madame Maxime saw them being brought in. She told me nothing, but she told me nothing very loudly. Fleur drew her knees up. Yes, dragons, one each. I have known for 3 days and not slept well any of them. She looked at him sidelong. Who told you? The British keep their secrets badly, but not that badly. The new defense teacher, Moody. Harry watched her face for it and got it, a flicker, the name meaning nothing to her, which told him the Watcher was not the Enclave, S was a separate hand. He's been studying me since the schools arrived. Tonight he offered to teach me to use the thing, the well. He knew exactly what I was failing at without my telling him. He let it sit. Your people want me married, this one wants me trained. Those are different appetites, Delacour, which means there are at least 2 boards, not one, and I'm a piece on both. Fleur was quiet for a moment, and he watched her do the same arithmetic he had done and arrive, visibly, at the same cold place. There is a thing I came to tell you, she said finally, and now I am more glad I did. My mother came to the carriage 3 nights ago, from the Enclave. She did not look at him. They have given up persuading me. Not because they have given up on you, because they have decided to go around me. She turned then, and there was real fear in it, not for herself. Harry, there will be a rival, a suitor, sanctioned, presentable, sent by the Enclave to press a claim, not for me. For you in the way they mean it, to be the one who secures you if I will not, and the purpose of him is not truly to win you. It is to make me fight for you so that I treat you as a prize too, so that while I am guarding you from him, someone else does something. I do not know what, my mother does not know what, but Ondine is behind it, and Ondine has never in her life made a plan with only one moving part. A distraction, Harry said. The rival's the front, something S coming through the back while everyone watches the front. He had already half built it. She had just handed him the frame. Did your mother say who? I've the back any of it. No, only that it is coming and that the methods are not asking any more. She held his eyes. I am telling you because you are right that we are pieces, and because a piece that knows the board is harder to take than a piece that does not, and because, she stopped and chose the next words with care, because whatever they have decided to do to you, they decided it without you, and I will not be one more person who lets a thing be done to you without you knowing it is being done. That is all. Do not make it more than it is. I won't, Harry said, and meant it, and noticed again the inconvenient fact that he was glad of her past the point the alliance accounted for. He turned it over and set it down. Rosier, he said, or any name like it. If a back door's coming, it'll have a hand on it. Did your mother say any names at all? An old family, a wizard, anyone the Enclave wouldn't normally deal with? Fleur frowned, reaching. No name, but she said the methods came from outside. That the Enclave does not have the knowledge for whatever Ondine means to do, and would have had to go to her word, was a stranger, an outsider, a wizard, someone with old and forbidden learning. She caught the focus in his face. That name means something to you, Rosier. It will soon, I think. Harry stood, because the gray was warming toward dawn, and a champion scene at the lake with the Beauxbatons champion was a complication neither of them needed. Old French family. Followed the Dark Lord, mostly died for it. If one of them survived clever enough to be loose, and Ondine needs an outsider with forbidden learning. He shook his head. It's a guess, but it's a guess that fits, and I'd rather be wrong about a name than blind about a hand. He looked down at her. Thank you for the warning. I know what it cost you to come over the mountains to tell me, given who sent your mother. It cost me nothing, Fleur said, lifting her chin. I do as I please. Right, Harry said, almost smiling. Of course you do. He walked back up to the castle in the first grey light with 3 weeks until a dragon and a clearer map than he'd had the night before, 2 boards, 2 appetites, a rival coming as a front, a back door behind it, and a name to test, Rosier, and a girl who kept choosing, at a real cost she would not admit, to stand on his side of it. He did not yet know how the door inside him opened. But he knew the shape of everyone trying to open it for their own ends, and knowing the shape of your hunters was, Moody had said it himself, the part you could actually rely on. The summons reached Fleur the next day, and it did not come as a letter. It came as a Pauline, though her mother had only just gone home. This was a second crossing, made because the Enclave was not satisfied with word relayed, and wanted its daughter looked in the eye. Maxime received her graciously again. Gabrielle flung herself into her arms again, and again it was not until that night, the curtain of the rear alcove drawn and Gabrielle asleep, that Apolline Delacour stopped being only a mother. You know why I have come back, Apolline said, because the first answer was not the one they wanted, so they sent the messenger they trust most to ask the question again, more slowly. Fleur set down the book she was not reading. It will be the same answer, Mammon, I know. Apolline's admission stopped her daughter mid-breath. I know it will. I told them so, and they did not believe me, because they cannot imagine a daughter of the blood refusing the blood, and so they have sent me to fail again, that they may believe the failure. She reached across and stilled Fleur's hands. But listen to me anyway, and then say whatever you wish, because I will carry it back word for word, I promise you that, and because there is a part of this you do not yet understand, and I would rather you heard it from someone who loves you. She drew a breath. You felt him. We all felt him, but you felt him as no Veela has felt anything in 5 generations, and that is not romance, Fleur, and it is not a trap your father built. It is the oldest and truest thing our blood can do, and it has chosen, and it chose you. The accounts say it does not choose wrongly. Her hand tightened. You are not being asked to marry a stranger for politics. You are being told that the deepest part of you has already recognized its match and that the future of everyone you love hangs on what you do about it. That is not a cage, my love. That is the truth. And I am afraid you have grown so used to fighting cages that you will fight the truth because it has come wearing the same shape. It was the best version of the argument that existed. Fleur understood that her mother had given her the strongest possible case, honestly out of love, and that this made it more dangerous than any of the Enclave's beautiful threats because there was no contempt in it to push against. There was only the unbearable possibility that they were all right. And if I went to him, Fleur said slowly, and told him what you have just told me, the blood chose, the future hangs on it, you are my match whether either of us wills it, what do you imagine he would do? If he is worthy, he would understand, he would walk into the lake. Fleur's voice was flat and certain. Mammon, I have spoken to him more than once. He is not a wizard who hungers to be wanted. He is a boy who has been wanted his whole life for what he is and never once for who, by people who all called it his destiny while they used him. The Dark Lord wanted him for his destiny. The British want him for their symbol. Papa wants him for the family. The Enclave wants him for the blood, and you are asking me to go to him and become one more voice that says, you are a worthy one, you have a match, the future depends on you, the choice was made before you were born. She shook her head slowly. He would be right to hate me for it, because every single person who has ever said the word destiny to that boy has been reaching for a leash. Apolline said nothing. You felt the blood choose, Fleur went on, and now her voice was not flat at all. So did I will not pretend I did not to you who would know. Something in me knows him. But Mammon, that is exactly why I will not deliver him. Because if the blood is right, if he is truly mine, then he is the one thing in my life that is mine and not the Enclave's, and I will not hand the one true thing I have ever felt to a committee of elders to be administered. And if the blood is wrong, if it is only an old instinct firing at a powerful stranger, then delivering him would be a crime and I would be the criminal. She drew her hands free. Either way, the answer is the same. I will not secure him. If anything is ever to happen between that boy and me, it will happen because two free people chose it with their eyes open, and not because anyone, even you, told me the future depended on it. There was a long silence in the curtained alcove. They will not accept that, Apolline said at last, very quietly. Seraphine, perhaps. Seraphine is old enough to love the principle of it, but the others, Ondine, your father. They will hear I refuse, and they will not stop, Fleur. They will only stop telling you. They will find another way to the same end with you or without you, and the others they would send are not me, and the methods they would use are not asking. She looked at her daughter with naked fear. Do you understand what you're setting yourself against? Not a marriage. The whole weight of a desperate people who have decided their survival is at stake. You are 17. I am the strongest daughter the blood has produced in 100 years, Fleur said. Seraphine says so herself, I have heard her. She lifted her chin, and in the wan light she looked, for an instant, like the matriarch she would one day either become or die refusing to become. If the blood made me strong, Mammon, then let it have made me strong enough to stand against the people who would misuse what it made me for. And if it did not, then they were wrong about me too, and they should find a better instrument, because I am not one. Apolline looked at her eldest child for a long moment, and then slowly something in her face changed, not agreement, not yet, but the first crack in the wall of the duty she had carried all her life, the first treasonous flicker of a mother who had spent the conversation arguing a case she was no longer sure she believed. I will carry it back word for word, Apolline said. As I promised, she rose. At the curtain she paused. Fleur, the boy, is there kindness in him, underneath all of it? Fleur thought of a boy on a flat rock saying you look like a person who got hit by a truck and walked all this way to find out what a truck is and meaning it gently and looking away from no one. Of a boy who had crossed the lawn at dawn to warn her that they were both pieces and had thanked her for a warning she had pretended cost nothing. Yes, she said. Though he would deny it and he hides it better than anything else he has. It is why I will not deliver him, Mammon. A cruel boy with that power I might have handed over and slept at night. It is the kindness that makes him a person, and I do not deliver persons. Fleur Delacour went back over the mountains the next morning and reported to the Enclave, word for word, exactly as she had promised. And in the reporting, in the precise neutral relaying of her daughter's refusal, something in her own voice gave her away to the one listener sharp enough to hear it, for Ondine, sitting at the right hand of the fire, heard not only what Fleur had said but how Apolline said it, and understood that the Enclave had just lost not one daughter but two, the eldest of the strongest line and her mother both. It changed nothing in Ondine's plans, it only confirmed them. The slow way was closed, very well. There remained the rival, and there remained the tournament, and there remained Gaspard Rosier's patient and terrible knowledge, and a boy who would, at scheduled intervals all winter long, be put in front of monsters with his core wide open and his defenders scattered, and a watching crowd ready to explain away anything at all. The first of those intervals was 3 weeks away, and its name was the first task, and somewhere in a Scottish castle a 14-year-old boy had stopped trying to call his power and started, instead, to plan for the hour it would be torn out of him whether he willed it or not. Chapter 3 and Chapter 4. First task. Harry spent the 3 weeks the way a general spends the days before a battle he did not choose, by refusing to fight the battle the enemy had designed. The enemy, whoever had put his name in the cup, wanted a spectacle, wanted a boy against a dragon, overmatched, desperate, his core torn open in front of a screaming crowd. So Harry decided in the first cold hour after Moody dropped the word in the dark that he would not give them desperation. He would give them a problem solved. A dragon was a tactical situation. Tactical situations had solutions that did not require you to be magnificent, they required you to be correct. He gathered the facts. There were 4 dragons, 1 per champion, and the task, he confirmed it by watching which spells the dragon handlers practiced, by reading the supply manifests Hagrid left lying about, by listening to what the judges did not say was retrieval. Something guarded. A nesting mother then, because nothing on earth guarded like a nesting mother, and nothing on earth was less reasonable. You could not out-magic a nesting dragon. A dragon's hide turned curses, and its core was older and angrier than any wizard's. You could not out-fly it for long. They were faster than they looked, and they did not tire. What you could do was understand that a nesting mother had exactly 1 priority, and that a creature with exactly 1 priority could be made to make exactly 1 mistake. He worked the problem the way he worked all of them, which was on paper alone at 1 in the morning, with the facts laid out in columns and the wrong ideas crossed off one by one until only the unwrong ones were left. He discarded the broom first. Everyone expected the broom. The enemy expected the broom. A champion who did the expected thing in a tournament built to break him had lost the only contest that mattered before the whistle blew. He discarded the duel. You did not outcurse a dragon. He discarded stealth, speed, brute force, and a dozen clever spells that worked beautifully on paper and got you eaten in practice, and at the end of a week of crossing off, he was left with a single principle that he turned over until it was smooth. Do not ask the dragon to do a thing against its nature. Ask its nature to do the thing for you. He did not tell anyone the plan. He told 1 person the shape of the problem, because a problem shared with the right mind came back sharper, and because he had decided, somewhere in those 3 weeks, that Fleur Delacour was the right mind. The weighing of the wands was theater, and Harry endured it as theater, standing in a row with the 3 real champions while a wand-maker pronounced their instruments sound, and a woman in acid-green robes with a poison quill tried to make a story out of the orphan boy who'd cheated his way into a death trap. He gave Rita Skeeter nothing, which was its own small art. A person who wants a story and gets only courtesy will write the courtesy as guilt, and there was nothing to be done about that, so he stopped trying and watched the room instead. He watched the dragon keeper Charlie Weasley try not to look grim. He watched Crouch the ministry man fail to attend, his eyes glassy, his attention somewhere 1,000 miles from the room, a sick man, Harry thought, or a hollow one, and not in any case the hand behind the cup, because the hand behind the cup would be watching Harry, and Crouch was watching nothing at all. He watched Karkaroff watch Crumb as a man watches an investment. And he watched Moody not watch him, the magical eye scrupulously elsewhere all afternoon, which told Harry more than staring would have, because a man who had stared for 2 months and suddenly stopped was a man who had got what he came for and no longer needed to look. He found Fleur afterward in the trophy room corridor alone, and he did not waste words. Retrieval, he said. A nesting mother guarding a clutch, and 1 false egg among the real ones you have to get out. You can't fight her and you can't outlast her, but she won't leave the clutch. That's the whole of her, the clutch. She'll take a stunner to the face before she'll step off those eggs. He held her eyes. So don't make her choose between you and the eggs. She'll always choose the eggs, and she's faster than you. Make her choose between 2 threats to the eggs, one of them louder than you. Conjure something, noise, a charging animal, anything on the far side of the clutch, big and stupid and loud, and she'll wheel on the loud thing because the loud thing is closer to her babies than you are. Then you have 3 seconds. Don't spend them being clever. Spend them on the egg and get out. Fleur looked at him for a long moment. You are giving me the answer, she said slowly. To a task we are both scored on, you could let me fail and place above me. She studied his face as though it were a thing she had not been reading correctly. Why? Because the score isn't the game, Harry said. Not for me. Surviving is the game, and finding out who wants me dead is the game, and not being owned is the game. The trophy's yours, you said it yourself. It's the one thing here that's yours. I'm not going to take it from you to win a contest I never entered. He shrugged, which on him was a rare loosening. And because we agreed our interests don't conflict. This is what that looks like when it's true. You hand me a warning over the mountains, I hand you a dragon. That's the trade. It's a good one. It was not, he understood as he said it, entirely about the trade, but he let her think it was because she had told him not to make it more than it was, and he had decided to give her that, because forcing a person to name a thing before they were ready was how you lost them. Fleur did not say thank you. People like Fleur did not say thank you, they said the thing underneath it. The conjuration trick will work for me, she said. It will not work for you, your dragon is the horntail. She saw the flicker she'd been hoping not to give him. Yes, I know which is which. Maxim saw the draw. The horntail does not wheel on noise. It does not leave the clutch for anything. It sets its tail to the eggs and faces out, and the tail spikes throw, and the fire is hottest of the four. Your trick is the right trick for the wrong dragon. You will need another. She lifted her chin. Now we are even, a dragon for a dragon. Harry looked at her, and something in his chest sounded its low note once, and he let it, and did not name it either. A dragon for a dragon, he agreed. We're even. He turned to go, and then turned back. The horntail faces out and won't leave the clutch. Good, that's not a problem. That's a constraint, and a constraint is just the shape of the solution before you've found it. He almost smiled. Thank you, Delacour, that was the piece I was missing. He walked away building it already, the new plan around the new constraint, and Fleur watched him go and thought he said thank you to me, for a fact, as though I had given him something that mattered and not something he was owed. And she understood, standing alone in the cold corridor, that the boy had just done to her without trying, the precise thing the entire enclave had spent a month failing to do by design. He had made her want, freely and on her own terms, to see him live through the next afternoon. The morning of the first task came up hard and bright and cold. The arena was a ring of rock open to the sky, a stadium of stands raised at its rim, and at its center a clutch of dragon's eggs, and coiled black around them the Hungarian horntail. Harry stood in the champions' tent and listened to the crowd rise and fall as the first 3 champions went out, one by one, and he did not watch through the canvas, because watching would tell him nothing and cost him focus. He sat on a stool with his eyes shut and ran the plan, start to finish, 4 times, until it was not a plan he was remembering, but a thing his hands already knew. Cedric went, and the roar said he had managed. Crumb went, and the roar said he had managed messily. Fleur went, and Harry stood up then and went to the canvas after all, because this one he wanted to see. She did it almost exactly as he'd warned her not to, and almost exactly right. Her dragon was a Welsh green, and she did not conjure noise. She did better. She caught its eye and held it, not a lure. The green was a female and immune, but the same trained stillness Harry had seen her use on people, a presence that filled the space and demanded attention, and into the held second she sang it down. A low charm half-sung, and the great green head drooped and settled, the dragon sliding into a doze with its clutch tucked under its chin. Fleur crossed the rock light and fast, and had her hand on the false egg before the green's tongue of sleeping flame licked out and caught the hem of her robes. She did not panic. Harry watched her not panic, watched her douse the fire with a flick and a jet of water from her own wand and carry the egg out at a walk, chin up, robes smoking, to a roar that started in surprise and ended in something close to awe. A partner, Harry thought, at the canvas, with a small cold flare of something he chose not to examine. She improved his trick on the fly under fire and walked out smoking and unbowed. Whatever else the afternoon held, he was glad, flatly, simply glad that she had walked out. Then the whistle blew, and a ministry voice called his name, and Harry Potter walked out onto the rock to meet a dragon. The horntail saw him at once. It was bigger than the descriptions. Descriptions never carried the size. The size was a fact you could only learn standing under it. 40 feet of black-scaled muscle with a tail like a mace rack and a head that swung to fix him with one molten eye, and behind it the clutch, the eggs, the one thing in the world it would die before abandoning. It did exactly what Fleur had said it would. It set its tail to the eggs and faced out, and the spiked tail came up and around in a flat, hard arc, and 3 spikes the length of swords tore through the air where Harry's head would have been if Harry had been standing still. Harry was not standing still. He had been moving since the whistle, low and fast along the curve of the rock wall, because a stationary target was a dead target, and the first rule of the plan was, never stop, never straight line, never give the tail a still thing to aim at. The spikes cracked off the rock behind him, and he was already changing angle, cutting the other way, reading the wind-up of the next throw in the bunch of the great shoulder muscle a half-second before the tail moved. He had not summoned his broom. That was the part the crowd was waiting for, and the part the enemy was waiting for, and the part Harry had cut from the plan 3 weeks ago, because a broom put him in the air where the fire owned the sky. He had something better than a broom. He had a constraint, and a constraint was the shape of a solution. The horntail faced out and would not leave the clutch. Good. Then he would not ask it to leave the clutch. He would give it a reason to bury the clutch, to do itself, the thing that would clear his path. He came in along the wall to a place he had chosen from the diagrams, where a shelf of loose scree hung above the clutch on the arena's high side, and he did not aim at the dragon at all. He aimed above it. He put everything his ordinary core had into a blasting curse, not at the unbreakable hide, but at the rock shelf overhanging the nest, and the shelf came down, a roaring slide of stone, tons of it, falling toward the eggs. The horntail did exactly what 40 million years of being a mother had built it to do. It abandoned its outward stance, wheeled, and threw its whole body over the clutch, wings spread, spine arched, shielding the eggs from the avalanche with its own armored back. The fire it had been saving for Harry went up instead in a roar at the falling rock, blasting the scree to gravel mid-air. and for 3 seconds the tail was down, the head was turned, and the false egg Harry had marked it, the pale unnatural gold of it in the first half-second on the rock, sat exposed at the near edge of the clutch with nothing between it and him but open ground. He ran. He had practiced the run. 40 feet of open rock, the false egg, and back, before the dragon understood the avalanche was spent and turned around. He was fast and he was low, and he was 11 feet from the egg when the horntail understood. It understood early. That was the variable he had not been able to plan for, the one fact no diagram held, the speed of the thing's mind. It felt the absence of new falling rock, registered the trick in a heartbeat, and came off the clutch in a single convulsive motion. Not the tail this time, no time for the tail, the head, the jaws, the fire, the whole front of it sweeping down and around at the boy in the open with a roar that Harry felt in his teeth. There was no cover, there was no time. He was 9 feet from the egg, and the fire was coming, and the cold, clean part of him that had run every number ran the last one, and got the same answer he had gotten in the wood, too slow. His shield charm would hold for a curse. It would not hold for dragonfire at 9 feet. He was going to burn, and the well opened. Moody had been right, which Harry would hate later and be grateful for now. It did not come for a drill, and it did not come for fear. It came for this, the airless certainty of a thing he could not allow about to happen, and nothing in his reach fast enough, and the floor of him dropped away into the bottomless dark, and the pressure came up, vast and flat and total, exactly as it had at the World Cup, wanting only for the danger to stop existing. But this time Harry was ready for it. This time he had spent 3 weeks thinking about nothing else, and he had decided in the cold storeroom at 1 in the morning that if the door was going to be torn open he would be standing in it when it was, with his hand on it, and he would not let it do what it had done in the wood, go out in every direction at once, a wasted pulse, a tide spent on the whole world. He throttled it. He could not have explained how. It was not a spell, and it had no incantation. It was an act of will against a flood, a boy in a doorway leaning his whole weight on a door that wanted to fly open, holding it to a crack, and through the crack, instead of the world-flattening pulse, came a single directed line of force, narrow and aimed in his, the first deliberate thing the depth had ever done, because it was the first time anyone had stood in the doorway to aim it. It met the dragonfire head-on. The fire did not reach him. The line of force took the flame and turned it, a wedge of pure pressure splitting the roar of it to either side so that it broke around Harry like water around a stone, scorching the rock white on both flanks and not touching the boy in the center. And behind the fire came the head, the jaws, and Harry, holding the door at a crack, his whole self bent to the holding, put the narrow line of force into the dragon's lowered skull and shoved. It was not a curse. It was 40 feet of dragon meeting something that did not care how much it weighed. The horntail's head was driven up and back as though it had run full tilt into a wall that had not been there a heartbeat before, the jaws snapping shut on empty air a foot above Harry's head, the whole vast body recoiling, off balance, reeling back toward the clutch it had half left. 3 seconds, Harry took them. He closed the door not all the way, he could not slam it, but back to a crack, then a sliver, then shut, the pressure draining out of him so fast it left him gray and swaying, and in the closing he covered the last 9 feet, and got his hand on the cold false gold of the egg, and turned and ran, and was at the arena wall and through the gap, and behind the barrier before the horntail had finished deciding whether the wall that hit it had been real. He went down on one knee in the safe rock behind the barrier, the egg in his arms, his ears full of a roar that he realized after a moment was the crowd and not the dragon, and he knelt there shaking, gray, emptied out, and grinning helplessly because he had done it. Not the pulse, not the wild uncontrolled flood. A line, a throttle, the first deliberate use of the thing at the bottom of him, aimed by a boy standing in his own doorway, and it had worked. The door had not been torn open after all. He had opened it himself, a crack on purpose, in the one moment it offered, and he had closed it again, and he was still standing, and the piece he had only ever been able to watch move itself had for 3 seconds moved when and where and how he told it to. I can hold it, he thought, kneeling in the rock with the egg cold against his chest and the world roaring. I can't call it yet, it still only comes when it's real. But when it comes, I can hold the door, I can aim it. He understood the size of what he'd just learned and the size of what remained, that he had aimed a sliver and it had thrown 40 feet of dragon, and that there was a whole sea behind the sliver, and that one day, if he lived, he might stand in that doorway and open it not to crack but wide. Madame Pomfrey was on him then, and the dragon handlers and the noise, and somewhere a ministry voice was reading scores. Harry let them fuss. He had what he came for. He had the egg, and he had his life, and he had the one thing worth more than either, which was proof that the most dangerous fact about him was not, as he had feared since the wood, a thing that would always own him. It was a thing he could learn to own. Ron found him that evening in the dormitory and stood in the doorway looking like a man who had walked a long way to say a short thing. "You could have died," Ron said, "out there." I watched it and I thought, and the whole time I'd been, he stopped and started over because Ron Weasley was bad at suspicion and bad at apology and entirely honest about both. I called you a cheat for weeks, because I was jealous. All right, there it is. You've got the whole world looking at you and you didn't even want it, and I'd give anything for 1/10 of it, and that's an ugly thing to feel about your best mate, and I felt it anyway. He swallowed. And then you walked out in front of a dragon and didn't even use a broom, and I thought, if he dies and the last thing I did was pin a stupid badge on Harry, I'm sorry. That's the whole speech. I rehearsed more, but that's the part that's true. Harry looked at him and ran, out of long habit, the cold arithmetic, and found for once that the arithmetic and the want agreed. It's fine, he said, and mostly meant it, and decided to mean the rest of it on purpose, because a friendship you could choose to repair was worth more than one that had never been tested. You were jealous and you were an idiot, and you're the first person in this castle to apologize for either, which is more than the ones who were just cruel will ever do. He almost smiled. Sit down. I've got a screaming golden egg and a clue I can't crack, and you're better at this stuff than you think you are. Help me and we'll call it square. Ron sat down, the gap that had been between them since Halloween quietly closing, and for an hour the two of them wrestled with the egg, which screeched like 100 murdered banshees every time Harry opened it, until Ron clapped his hands over his ears and shouted that it sounded like Percy singing in the bath, and Harry, laughing for the first time in weeks, really laughing, set the thing down and thought, with the part of him that never stopped working, that a clue which sounded like screaming above the water might sound like something else entirely beneath it. He did not solve it that night. He did not need to. The second task was months off, and he had bigger boards to watch. But he had his friend back and a thread to pull on the egg, and the knowledge sitting warm and certain under everything else, that he had stood in front of a dragon and held the door of his own power and lived, and that whatever came next, he would not meet it as the boy who'd been afraid of the thing inside him. Fleur watched the whole of the task from the champion's enclosure, and afterward she could not have told anyone in what order her feelings had arrived, only that none of them had been the ones she'd expected. She had braced to watch him die. She had told herself in the cold dawn after she'd handed him the Horntail's nature that she had done what she could and that the boy was clever and that cleverness was sometimes enough, and she had not believed it because she had seen the Horntail brought in and she knew what it was. She had come to the enclosure ready to watch a 14-year-old burn. Instead, she watched him refuse the broom. That was the first thing, the thing that turned her braced grief into a fierce, sharp attention. He did not summon the broom everyone was waiting for. He did the unobvious thing, the planned thing, the thing that said this boy walked onto that rock having already decided how the fight would go and meant to make it go that way. She watched him run the wall and read the tale and bring the shelf down, and she understood the trick the instant the rock began to fall, give it a reason to bury the clutch itself, and something in her that had spent its whole life being the cleverest person in every room sat up and said, sharply, "Oh." And then the dragon had been faster than the plan, and the fire had come, and Fleur had risen out of her seat with a cry she did not hear herself make. Because 9 feet was nothing, 9 feet was death, and there was no cover and no time, and the air over the rock had gone taut as a struck drumhead, and the fire had split around the boy like water around a stone, and 40 feet of dragon had been driven back as though it had hit a wall, and Fleur Delacour had felt from 100 yards off. The note, not the World Cup pulse, not the wild flood that had wrung her like crystal from 40 miles. This was the same depth, the same bottomless tone, but narrowed, aimed, held. A struck bell rung not by accident, but by a hand on the clapper. She had felt the difference in her own bones, and she had understood it before she understood anything else. He is learning to hold it, the thing the Enclave wants, the thing Ondine means to steal. He is teaching himself alone on a rock in front of a dragon to be its master instead of its instrument. And that was the thought that changed everything, standing in the enclosure with the crowd screaming around her. She had come to this tournament thinking of Harry Potter as a worthy one, a core, a hope, a thing that mattered because of what it could do for her people. And in the space of 3 seconds on the rock, watching a boy stand in the doorway of his own power and lean his whole weight against a flood and bend it, by will alone, to save his own life, Fleur had stopped entirely, irrevocably, thinking of him as a thing that mattered for what it could do. She had started thinking of him as a person who was, against every reasonable expectation, magnificent, not a prize, not a worthy one, not an asset of the blood. A partner, the word arrived unbidden, and she did not push it away this time. Someone who handed her a dragon's nature in a cold corridor because the trade was good, and refused the broom because the broom was expected and stood in the fire and lived. Someone she might, if the world allowed it, actually choose, not because the blood had chosen for her, because she had watched him with her own eyes do the bravest and most difficult thing she had ever seen a person do. She found him an hour later in the corridor outside the medical tent, when the handlers had cleared and the crowd had drained away, and she stopped a careful 2 yards off, and for a moment neither of them said anything. "You refused the broom," she said at last. "Everyone expected the broom. You split dragonfire with your bare will. I had help." He looked at her, gray and tired and standing. "A dragon for a dragon. You told me it faced out and wouldn't leave the clutch. So I gave it a reason to bury the clutch itself. That was your piece. I just stood in the right place to use it. Fleur shook her head slowly. No, she said, the trick with the rock, that was clever, yes, anyone clever might have thought of it, but the rest, she stopped and chose, for once, to say the thing underneath instead of the thing on top, because the afternoon had earned it. I felt it, Harry, from the stands, when you held the fire, the note, but aimed, held. You are teaching yourself to master the thing my whole people have wanted for 1,000 years, and you are doing it alone on a rock in front of a dragon because no one ever taught you that you were allowed to have help. Her voice was not steady, and she let it not be steady. And I watched you do it, and I stopped thinking of you the way they all think of you. I want you to know that. The Enclave wants a worthy one. My father wants a match. I watched you split a dragon's fire today, and I wanted to know the boy who did it. That is the difference. That is the only difference that has ever mattered, and I wanted you to hear it from me, on a day you earned it, and not because anyone told either of us to feel it. Harry looked at her for a long moment, gray-faced and swaying slightly and absolutely steady where it counted, and the low note sounded once in his chest of its own accord, and he let it. Careful, Delacour, he said quietly. That almost sounded like a free choice. It was, Fleur said. It is the first one I have made about you, and I made it standing up, watching you live, and the Enclave can choke on it. She lifted her chin. Now go and rest. You look terrible, and there is a second task, and I intend to beat you on that one fairly, now that I know you are worth beating. She turned and walked away down the cold corridor, silver-headed, smoke-smelling, unbowed, and Harry watched her go and understood that the afternoon had changed two things and not one. He had learned to hold the door. And the alliance of interests between two careful people had, somewhere on a rock in front of a dragon, quietly become something neither of them had planned, and neither of them yet had a name for something chosen from both sides with their eyes open, exactly as they had each sworn it would have to be or never be at all. The castle's verdict on Harry reversed itself within a week, which he found more instructive than the contempt had been. The same students who had pinned Potter Stinks to their cloaks now wanted to stand near him in corridors, and the badges vanished, and a third year he had never spoken to thanked him earnestly for showing those foreign champions what Hogwarts could do. And Harry accepted all of it with the flat courtesy he'd given the contempt, because a crowd that turned on you in a week was a crowd that would turn back in a week. And the only sane response to either was to not be the kind of person whose footing depended on which way it had turned last. He had learned that on Privet Drive too. Approval was weather. You did not build on weather. What he built on, instead, was beginning to take a shape that the whole school could see, and none of it understood. He and Fleur stopped pretending the lake was a coincidence. They did not announce anything, there was nothing to announce, and announcing things was how you handed other people a thing to take, but they walked the grounds together in the cold afternoons and ate sometimes at the same end of a table, and the castle, which had spent autumn certain that Fleur Delacour was a goddess and Harry Potter a cheat, now revised itself into a low confused hum of how and surely not, and what does she see in him? Harry let them hum. The honest answer to what does she see in him was that she saw the one person her nature couldn't move, and that being unable to move someone was the only condition under which she had ever been free to actually look. But that was not an answer the humming wanted, so he kept it, and so did she. Hermione cornered him about it, of course, because Hermione cornered him about everything that mattered. It's real, she said. It was not a question this time. I watched you with her at the lake. You don't perform with her, you perform with everyone, Harry. A different Harry for Ron, a different one for me, a careful one for teachers. You've got a whole wardrobe of yourself, and you change it by the room. With her you don't change, that's the tell. That's how I know it's real and not strategy. She studied him. I'm glad. I want you to know I'm glad, even if it terrifies me, because the last time you cared about something this much it nearly got you killed in a chamber, and you care about her more than you cared about that. I know, Harry said, because she had earned the truth and because it was true. It's a vulnerability, a clean one, the kind an enemy can use, and there are enemies, Hermione, more than you know, and I can't tell you the shape of them yet because it isn't safe for you to hold. He looked at her. I ran the numbers on caring about her. The numbers said don't, too exposed, too much to lose. I'm doing it anyway, and that's never happened, and I've decided to stop treating it as a malfunction and start treating it as information. A breath. Turns out there are things worth being a worse tactician for. I didn't believe that a year ago. I'm trying to learn how to believe it without getting us both killed. Hermione was quiet a moment. That, she said, might be the most grown-up thing I've ever heard you say. It's also deranged, and I hate it. Both can be true. Both can be true, Harry agreed. It's usually the correct answer. He spent the weeks after the dragon doing two things in parallel, because parallel was the only way he knew how to live. The first was the egg, which he carried back to the storeroom and opened under a basin of water on a hunch and heard turn from a screech into a song. A Merpeople's verse about an hour in the Black Lake and a thing he would sorely miss, and he understood, reading it, exactly who the judges would take when the time came, and understood that the knowledge clarified rather than frightened him, which told him something about how far he had already come. The second was control. He no longer tried to summon the well. He had proven that was hopeless, that it came only when the need was real. Instead, he practiced for the coming of it. Every night he stood in the cold storeroom and rehearsed the holding, the doorway, the throttle, the active will against a flood, so that when the door was next torn open by a true need, his hand would already know its place on it. He could not call the sea, but he could be ready every single time to stand in its path and aim it. In readiness, Moody had said, the one true thing the false man had given him was the part you could actually rely on. He thought about Moody often in those weeks. The man had stopped watching him so openly since the dragon had gotten Harry suspected, the data point he'd been waiting for, the confirmation that the boy could hold his own door, and a man who stopped watching once he had what he wanted was a man whose wanting Harry now needed urgently to understand. 3 boards. The enclave that wanted him wed the wizard he'd named Rosier, who wanted him bound, and this third hand who wanted him, trained, tested, and then the cup had put him in this tournament. The tournament put him at scheduled intervals in front of monsters. Someone wanted to see what he could do, and someone wanted to know how far he could be pushed, and the difference between those 2 appetites and the enclave's hunger for marriage was the difference between a suitor and a butcher, and Harry did not yet know which of his hunters was which. He would find out. He always found things out, and he had now 2 advantages he had not had at the World Cup. He could hold his own door, and he was not, for the first time in his life, doing it alone. 2 figures had watched the task from very different vantages, and neither was in the stands. Gaspard Rosier watched through the eyes of a raven on the arena rim, a borrowed sight he had paid dearly to arrange, and what he saw made him set down his teacup with a care that in a less controlled man would have been called alarm. He held it, Rosier said softly, to the empty room, to the raven's distant sight. The fire came and the core opened, and he did not let it flood. He aimed it. At 14, untaught in extremis, he stood in the door and aimed it. He turned the cold cup in his fingers. The account said a worthy one's core could be bound only while it was caught open and unguarded, in sleep, in distraction, or in the helpless flood of an untrained expenditure. A flood was unguarded, a flood could be bound. But a core whose owner had learned to stand in his own doorway, to open it on purpose and close it again, to hold and aim and master it, that core was never unguarded, not even at the moment of its greatest use, because the hand that aimed it was the hand that guarded it, and they were the same hand. He had perhaps weeks, not the season he had thought. Every task the boy survived, he survived by learning, and a boy who learned this fast would, by the 3rd task, be a fortress that held its own door, and a fortress could not be bound. The slow way, the rival, the patient erosion of the girl's resistance was too slow now. It would have to be the fast way, and it would have to catch him in the one window that remained, not the flood of an untrained surge which was closing, but the exhaustion that came after a great expenditure, the gray emptied-out minutes when the door, briefly, could not be held because there was nothing left to hold it with. He had seen those minutes today. He had seen the boy go gray and sway. There in the hour after the power, not during it, was the window, and it would be open at the next task, and the one after, and Gaspard Rosier began, that afternoon, to plan around it. Undine watched from a hillside beyond the wards, and what she saw made her smile, because she did not understand cores as Rosier did, and so she saw only that the boy was more powerful than even the accounts had promised, and a more powerful prize was a greater triumph for the witch who took it. She did not see what Rosier saw. She did not see the window closing. She saw only the prize growing, and she sent her sanctioned suitor north that very evening, a presentable young wizard of an enclave-allied line, primed to press his claim and provoke Fleur's rivalry, and she did not know because Rosier had not told her that the rival was now a feint inside a feint. A front the enclave's hardliner thought was the plan, behind which a French dark wizard had quietly moved up his timetable, and decided that the boy would be taken not slowly and not by marriage but soon. In the gray, exhausted minutes after some future task, by hand the boy did not yet fear. Far below them, in a warm corridor, a boy and a girl had each, that afternoon, made a free choice. Above them, on a cold hillside and in a quiet room, 2 other powers had made colder ones. And between the choices, the winter deepened toward Christmas and toward a ball, and toward the hour all of it had been building to since a pulse went out across a burning field in August and found, among the dancing Veela, a girl it rang like a bell. Chapter 4 and Chapter 5, Family Confrontation. The rival arrived first, which was its own kind of message. Armand Beaumont came up the drive to Hogwarts a week after the first task in a coat that had cost more than the Weasleys' house, escorted by a ministry seal that opened every door, and he had the kind of looks that made a corridor go quiet, the polished, deliberate handsomeness of a young man who had been told he was beautiful since before he could walk, and had built his whole strategy around it. He was 20 of the House of Beaumont, an old enclave-allied line, and he carried himself as a man arriving to collect a thing already promised to him. Harry watched him cross the entrance hall from the shadow of the stairs and read him in under a minute, because Armand Beaumont was the easiest thing he had read all year. The smile that arrived a half-second before it was earned. The eyes that checked each face for its reaction to him and adjusted. The whole performance of a person who had learned that charm was a currency and had never once met a transaction it couldn't buy. He was here ostensibly as a guest of the Beauxbatons delegation, an old friend of the family come to support their champion. He was here actually. Harry had the frame from Fleur, and the frame snapped over Beaumont like a glove, to be a rival, to press a claim. To make Fleur fight for Harry so that she'd treat Harry as a prize, while something else moved through the door her attention left open. The front of a feint, Harry thought, watching Beaumont charm Madame Maxim with a bow and a phrase. He's not even a good front. Which means either Ondine thinks I'm stupid, or the front's supposed to be obvious, supposed to draw the eye loud and bright so the eye doesn't go looking for the quiet thing. He's the avalanche. Somewhere there's an egg. He did not yet know what the egg was. He knew now that there would be one. Fleur knew Armand Beaumont, which made it worse. She had known him since she was 15 and he was 18, and the enclave had begun, in its elegant, indirect way, to suggest that the House of Beaumont and the House of Delacour might one day find their interests aligned. He had courted her then with the lazy confidence of a man who had been told the match was sensible, and assumed the sensible was the same as the settled. She had turned him down flat twice, and he had taken it as a phase, because men like Armand Beaumont did not have a category for a woman who simply did not want them. They had only not yet. So when he found her in the Beauxbatons carriage that evening and smiled his half-second early smile and said, "Fleur, you look magnificent. I have come to help you with your little British problem," she understood the whole of Ondine's plan in one cold flush of fury, and understood, too, that the fury was exactly what the plan wanted. "I have no British problem," she said, "the boy, the worthy one." Beaumont said it as though it were a charming secret between them. "The enclave is concerned, Fleur. You have been possessive, unwilling to share the burden. They worry you have grown attached to him as a person, which would be very sweet and very inconvenient." He spread his hands. "So they have sent me, to press the claim properly on the family's terms if you find you cannot, or," the smile again, "to give you a reason to remember that you are a Delacour and he is a prize, and prizes are won, not befriended. Either way the blood is served. I confess I do not much mind which way it goes. I have always been fond of you, and I am not above letting a little competition make you finally see sense." It was so exactly the trap that Fleur nearly laughed. He wanted her to fight him for Harry. The whole purpose of him was to make her say mine, to make her treat Harry as a thing she would not let Beaumont have, because a girl who fought to keep a prize had already agreed it was a prize. Ondine had built a beautiful machine, and Armand Beaumont was too vain to know he was only a part of it, and the correct move, the move that broke the machine, was to refuse to play the game at all. "Armand," Fleur said pleasantly, "listen to me, because I will say it once. I am not going to fight you for him. He is not a prize, and I will not treat him as one, and so there is nothing here for you to win. You may press whatever claim you like. He cannot be compelled. Your allure will break on him as mine does, as it has broken on no one else either of us has ever met, and he will not be charmed because he sees you exactly as clearly as I do, which is to say entirely. You will press and he will decline, and you will go home, and the only thing you will have accomplished is to have told me very loudly that Ondine is afraid enough to send a fool." She smiled. "Give her my regards." Beaumont's own smile did not falter, because it never faltered, but something moved behind his eyes, calculation catching up to contempt, and Fleur understood that she had done the right thing and the dangerous thing at once. She had broken the front. She had refused to be the avalanche's reason, which meant that whoever was counting on the avalanche to draw the eye now knew the avalanche had failed and would move sooner and harder to whatever the quiet thing was. She went to find Harry that night and found that her father had arrived. Sébastien Delacour came under the most unimpeachable cover in the world, a father visiting his daughters at a foreign school over the Christmas holidays, with his wife and his youngest child, perfectly ordinary, perfectly above suspicion. Madame Maxime gave the family the use of a private wing of the carriage. Gabrielle was ecstatic. Apolline was quiet in a way that Fleur, who knew her mother's quiets, read at once as the quiet of a woman who had crossed the mountains carrying a thing she did not want to deliver. He summoned Fleur the first night alone, and he did it gently, with wine and her favorite cakes and the warmth of a man who genuinely loved his daughter and had genuinely convinced himself that what he wanted for her was the same as what was good for her, and Fleur sat across from her father and braced for the hardest conversation of her life. "You have done well here," Sébastien said. "The dragon, the whole school speaks of it. I am proud of you." He let the warmth sit. "And I think it is time we spoke plainly, you and I, as adults, about the boy. There is nothing to speak about, Papa. There is everything to speak about." He set down his glass. "Fleur, I know you feel cornered. I know the enclave has been clumsy, the letters, that ridiculous Beaumont child, Ondine's heavy hand. I have not approved of all of it, but you are letting the clumsiness of the messengers blind you to the truth of the message." Leaned forward, and his voice was a father's, reasonable, loving, terrible. "You felt him. You, of all the daughters of the blood, felt him strongest. That is not nothing. That is the deepest thing our family has ever been given, and it has been given to you, and with it has come a chance for the blood, yes, but also for you. A worthy one, a core like the world has not seen in 5 generations, and it has turned toward my daughter. Do you understand what your life could be, what our family could be? You would not be a champion who placed well in a foreign tournament. You would be the woman who saved her people, the first lady of the enclave, and he, Sebastian, spread his hands. He would have a family at last, a place, a future, instead of being a curiosity the British keep in a cupboard. You would be saving him too, Fleur. You would be giving him the one thing no one has ever given him. It was, Fleur thought, the most dangerous version of the argument yet, because her father believed it, every word, and because it was woven through with just enough truth to cut. Harry did have no family. The enclave did face extinction. She had felt him strongest. None of it was a lie. It was worse than a lie. It was a true frame built around a false conclusion, and the false conclusion was the same one it had always been, that Harry Potter was a thing to be administered for the good of other people, and that loving him and managing him were the same act. Papa, Fleur said, I am going to tell you what I told Mammon, and I am going to ask you to hear it because you are my father and I love you, and after tonight I do not know that we will be able to speak of this without breaking something. She set down her own glass. I will not deliver him, not to the blood, not to the family, not to you. Not because I do not care whether the enclave lives, I do, more than you know, but because the price you are asking is the one thing I will not pay, which is to take the deepest thing I have ever felt and hand it to a committee to be administered. You say I would be saving him. You would be doing to him exactly what the Dark Lord did, and the British did, and everyone has always done, wanting him for what he is and calling it love. He has had a lifetime of people wanting him for his destiny. I will not be one more. Her voice did not shake, which surprised her. If anything ever happens between Harry Potter and me, it will be because two free people chose it openly, with no one's hand on the scale. And if that means the blood dies, Papa, if it truly comes to that, then the blood will die having raised at least one daughter who refused to become the thing the wizards always feared we were. I would rather be the last free Veela than the first lady of a people who saved themselves by enslaving a boy. Sebastian Delacour was silent for a long moment, and when he spoke his voice had changed, and the change frightened her more than shouting would have, because it had gone quiet and certain and cold. You are 17, he said, and you mistake your principles for the world. You think you can simply refuse, and that refusal will be the end of it. It will not. I have tried to do this the gentle way, Fleur, because you are my daughter and I love you and I wanted you to come to it yourself. But the matter is too large to be left to a 17-year-old's pride. He rose. The betrothal will be arranged. I have the standing to arrange it, and the boy is a minor without a guardian competent to object. There is no one in his life with the legal weight to stand against a properly filed magical contract, and I have spent a career filing contracts. It will be done correctly, and it will be done soon, and you will, in time, thank me when you are the woman who saved her people and not the romantic who let them die. He looked down at her, and there was love in it still, which was the worst part. I am sorry. I had hoped you would choose it, but some things are too important to be left to choice. And Fleur understood, looking up at her father, that the slow, gentle persuasion was over, and that the man she loved most after her sister had just told her kindly that he was going to do the thing to Harry that she had crossed an ocean to prevent, with the full weight of the French ministry behind him, whether she or Harry willed it or not. She did the only thing left to do. She got up and she went to find Harry to tell him that the quiet thing behind the avalanche was her own father, and that it was no longer coming, it was here. Harry listened to all of it on the cold rock by the lake at midnight, and did not interrupt once, which Fleur had learned was how he listened when something mattered, completely gathering, saving every reaction for the end. A magical betrothal contract, he said when she had finished, filed by a senior official of a foreign ministry. Naming a minor with no competent guardian, he turned it over. He's not wrong about the guardian. The Dursleys would sign anything to be rid of me, and they wouldn't read it. Dumbledore could object, but Dumbledore objecting to a French ministry contract on my behalf turns it into an international incident, which your father has surely planned for. He wants it boring, administrative, a thing that's simply done before anyone with standing notices it's being done. He looked at her. How binding is it if it's filed and I refuse to honor it? What happens? It depends what is written into it. Fleur's voice was tight. The old contracts were terrible things. Magical betrothal can be made enforcing. Compulsion woven into the binding so that the parties are drawn to fulfill it, and resisting brings pain, sickness, a wasting. The ministry banned the enforcing kind decades ago. She met his eyes. But my father is the ministry, Harry, in the part that matters, and the enclave knows the old forms, and Ondine wants you bound by any means at all. A contract filed by my father, with enclave craft woven through it that the British clerks would never detect. She stopped. It would not be a piece of paper. It would be a leash with my name on the other end, written by people who do not care that I do not want to hold it, designed to drag us both toward a thing neither of us chose and to hurt us if we refused. Harry was quiet for a moment. Then we don't let it be filed, he said, or we make it cost more than it's worth. Your father's a careful man. He wants this boring, so we make it loud. A careful man's whole strategy collapses the second the thing he needs to keep quiet becomes the thing everyone's watching. He looked at her. But that's the second move. The first move is simpler, and I think it's mine to make, not yours. He stood. I need to meet them, your family, face to face tomorrow. Fleur stared at him. Why would you walk into that? He wants you in a room. A room is where contracts get signed. A room is also where I get to be a person instead of a name on a manifest, Harry said. Right now I'm an abstraction to your father, a core, a worthy one, a thing he's arranging. People do things to abstractions they'd never do to a person sitting across the table looking them in the eye. He's never met me. He met a dossier, a cold flicker of something that was almost a smile. Let me make myself harder to file. The Delacours received him the next evening in the private wing of the carriage, and it was, Harry understood the moment he walked in, meant to be an ambush dressed as a dinner. Sebastian rose with perfect courtesy. Apolline beside him was pale and watchful. Gabrielle, who had not been told what the evening was, beamed at the famous boy who had fought a dragon. And in the corner, uninvited and entirely present, lounged Armand Beaumont, brought to remind everyone in the room that there was a sanctioned alternative if the unsanctioned boy proved difficult. Fleur stood by the window with her arms folded and a look on her face that promised violence to the whole assembled tableau. Harry took it all in and chose his ground. He did not sit where the chair had been placed for him, angled to put his back to Beaumont. He moved it, sat where he could see the whole room, and let the small act of refusing the arranged seat be the first thing he said before he said anything. Monsieur Delacour, he said, thank you for dinner. I won't be staying for it, so I'll be brief and honest, which I suspect is more than this evening was designed to be. He met the man's eyes. Your daughter tells me you mean to file a betrothal contract naming me, with enclave craft woven into it, the enforcing kind. A leash in plain terms designed to drag me toward a marriage I didn't agree to and hurt me if I resist. I want to make sure I understand the situation correctly before I respond to it. The room went still. Sebastian recovered first, smooth as poured oil. You have been misinformed, and you are very direct for a guest, he said. Harry, may I call you Harry? You are a remarkable young man, and I understand you have had a hard life, and you have learned to expect the worst of people. I do not blame you for it, but you misunderstand what is being offered. This is not a leash. This is a family. You have never had one. We are offering you a place, a name, a future, a people who would value you. For my core, Harry said. Not for me, for my core. He did not raise his voice. I've been valued for what I am my whole life, Monsieur Delacour, by people who all called it love while they reached for the leash. So I've gotten very good at telling the difference between someone who wants me and someone who wants the thing I can do. And everyone in this room except your wife and your daughters wants the thing I can do. He glanced at Beaumont, him most transparently, you most competently, so let's not call it a family. Let's call it what it is, an acquisition, and negotiate like adults, which is the only respect I'm prepared to extend to a man planning to put a leash on me over the soup. You forget yourself, Sebastian said, and the warmth had gone out of him now, the official surfacing through the father. You are 14, you are a minor with no guardian of standing. The contract will be filed whether you sit at this table or not, and your objection, however clever, however bravely spoken, has no legal weight at all. I had hoped to do this with your consent for your own sake so that you might come to see it as the gift it is. But your consent is not, in the end, required. That is the truth of your situation, and the sooner you accept it, the easier it will be for everyone. Papa, Fleur began, stepping forward, and Armand Beaumont, bored, vain, and entirely sure of his welcome, chose that moment to make his single contribution to the evening. He rose, crossed to Fleur, and took her by the arm, not gently, the grip of a man asserting a thing he believed was owed him, and said in French, low, sit down, Fleur, and stop embarrassing your father. The boy will be handled. You and I have our own matter to settle, and I am tired of waiting. He never finished. Because Harry Potter felt across the room, a girl he had chosen grabbed against her will by a man who thought he was owed her, and the floor of him dropped away. It came, as it always came, because it was real. Beaumont's hand on Fleur's arm, Fleur's body going rigid, the 8-year-old in the corner suddenly frightened, the airless certainty of a thing he could not allow, and nothing in his ordinary reach fast enough, and the well opened, the bottomless dark, the pressure rising vast and total. But Harry was standing in the doorway when it came. He had been standing in it since the dragon, and this time there was no fire to split and no dragon to throw and no need, none at all, to let it flood, so he did not. He held the door at a sliver, the narrowest crack, and let through not a blast and not a pulse but only pressure, a single, silent, perfectly controlled wave of presence that rolled out from him across the room and stopped precisely at the edges of it. Every candle in the wing guttered and stood still, the wine stilled in the glasses. The very air went taut as a struck drumhead, and Armand Beaumont was lifted off his feet, not thrown, not hurt, simply set back, picked up by a force that had no anger in it and put down 3 feet from Fleur with his hand empty and his face white, his polished confidence gone in an instant to the animal, understanding that he was a small thing in the presence of a very large one. And then Harry closed the door. Not slammed, closed, controlled, drawing the pressure back into himself so that the candles steadied and the wine settled and the room came back to ordinary, and the only thing that remained of the well was the sudden absolute silence and the look on every adult face in it. He had not raised his wand. He had not spoken a word. He had reached the bottom of himself in front of all of them and held it and aimed it and let it go again. Unwill alone, and the difference between this and the World Cup pulse, the difference that every Veela in the room felt in their bones, was that this had been chosen. Throttled, mastered. A boy standing in the doorway of the greatest core in the world, opening it a sliver to make a single point and closing it again because he decided to. "Don't touch her," Harry said into the silence quite calmly to Beaumont. "She doesn't belong to you. She doesn't belong to anyone. That's rather the whole point." He turned back to Sebastian Delacour, who had risen halfway from his chair and now stood frozen, a man who had spent the evening speaking of an abstraction, and had just watched the abstraction become the most powerful thing he had ever stood in a room with. "You said my consent isn't required," Harry said. "I want to make sure you understand what you just saw, monsieur, because it bears on that. That's the thing you mean to put a leash on. I held it just now, opened it, used it, closed it, because I chose to, the way you'd open and close your hand. 6 weeks ago I couldn't. It only came when I was about to die. Now it comes when I want it to make a point, and a month from now it'll come whenever I call." He let that land. "Your enclave craft binds a core that's caught open and unguarded. You're betting you can catch mine. But every week you wait, the door I just showed you gets easier for me to hold, and a core whose owner holds his own door cannot be bound. Ask Ondine's outside expert. He'll tell you it's in the accounts. So your window is closing and you know it, and that's why your wife crossed the mountains looking like a woman delivering a thing she hated, and that's why you're rushing a contract you wanted to do slowly. You're not negotiating from strength, Monsieur Delacour. You're racing a clock." "And I am the clock," the silence held. "File your contract," Harry went on. "Truly file it, and here's what happens. I refuse it publicly, loudly, the famous Harry Potter naming a French ministry official in an enforcing betrothal of a minor, the enforcing kind, the banned kind, to the same poison-quilled journalist who's been hunting a story about me all autumn. Your boring administrative matter becomes an international scandal with your name on it, in 2 countries, with the British Aurors and your own ministry's rivals, and every enemy a man of your rank has accumulated, all reading the same column. You don't get the core. You get the ruin of a career you spent 30 years building, and the enclave gets exposed as a people who tried to enslave a child in print forever." He stood. "You're a careful man. Run the numbers. I have." It was, Apolline Delacour would say afterward, the moment everything turned, not the display of power, though the power had stopped her heart, but what came after it. The boy having shown them the storm, setting it down and reasoning with her husband as a cold equal, offering him a way out that cost the boy nothing and saved the man's career if only he would stop. A cruel boy would have ruined Sebastian on the spot. A frightened boy would have fled. This one had counted the moves and offered the man the chance to choose differently, which was a mercy dressed as a threat, and Apolline, who had argued the enclave's case to her daughter twice, out of love and duty, looked at the boy her people wanted to leash and understood, finally and completely, that her daughter had been right about all of it. "Sebastian," Apolline said quietly into the silence, and it was the first time all evening she had spoken. "Stop, look at him, look at what you are trying to leash." She rose and crossed the room and stood between her husband and the boy, which was a thing no one in that wing had ever seen Apolline Delacour do. "Our daughter has been telling us for 2 months that he is a person and not a prize, and we have not listened because we did not want to. I am listening now. I watched him pick that fool up off Fleur's arm and set him down without a mark on him, when he could have broken him, and then offer you your own career back when he could have ended it. That is not a thing to be acquired, Sebastian. That is a man, and I will not be party to leashing him, not for the blood, not for the family, not for you." She turned to Fleur and her eyes were wet. "You were right. I am sorry it took me so long to say it. You were right, and I am with you, and we will tell the enclave so together." Sebastian Delacour stood in the wreck of his evening and looked at his wife and his daughter and the boy, and Harry watched the man do the arithmetic at last. Watched the careful official weigh a contract he could no longer file quietly against a scandal he could not survive and a wife and daughter he had just lost to the other side of it, and watched the ambition, for the first time all year, lose. "Get out," Sebastian said to Beaumont, not loudly. "Go back to Ondine and tell her front has failed and her clock has run, and that I am done being her door." Beaumont went white and silent, his beauty doing nothing for him at all. Sebastian turned to Harry. "I will not file the contract." His voice was a ruin of itself. "Not because you frightened me, though you did, because my wife is right, and because I have spent 6 months calling a thing love that was not love, and a man my age does not get many chances to stop before the thing is done." He looked suddenly very tired. "I wanted to save my people. I told myself that made it permissible. It did not." His eyes went to his daughter. "Fleur, forgive me in time if you can. I came here to arrange your life. I am leaving having watched you refuse to let me, and I find, God help me, that I am proud of you for it." Gabrielle, who had understood almost none of it except that her sister was upset and the famous boy had made the candles go strange, slid off her chair when the grown-ups had gone quiet and walked across the room to Harry and looked up at him with the total fearlessness of a child who had not learned that some people were dangerous. "Are you the boy Fleur felt?" she asked. "At the cup, the one Mammon wrote letters about." "I think so," Harry said. "Are you going to marry her?" "Gabrielle," Fleur started. Only if she wants me to, Harry said gravely to the 8-year-old, and only if I want to, and only after a long time when we've both decided for ourselves and nobody made us. That's the rule. Do you think that's a good rule? Gabrielle considered this with great seriousness. Yes, she decided, because Mammon says you should only marry someone if you like them, and you can't make someone like someone. She looked at her sister. Do you like him, Fleur? There was a silence in which a great many things hung. Yes, Fleur said at last, quietly to her sister, in front of her mother and her broken father and the boy himself, choosing the moment and choosing the truth. I do, not because anyone told me to, because I watched him fight a dragon and refuse a leash and pick a fool up off my arm and set him down gently and offer Papa his own life back when he had every right to take it. I like him very much, Petite. I chose to. That is the whole point. Harry looked at her across the room, and the low note in his chest sounded once clear, and for the first time he did not let it pass unnamed even to himself. Same, he said simply, which was the most he had ever said, and from him an avalanche. I chose to, that's the whole point. It was not a grand declaration. It was two careful people in a wrecked room in front of the family that had tried to arrange them, saying the plain true thing on their own terms at last, and it was worth more than every word the Enclave had ever written, because no one had told them to say it, and no one could have made them, and they both knew it, and that was the entire and only thing that had ever mattered. Far to the south, Ondine received Beaumont's report the next morning, and Gaspard Rosier received it an hour later, and the two of them drew from the same failure two entirely different conclusions. Ondine raged. The front had failed, the girl had refused the rival, the mother had turned, even Sebastian, the open door, had slammed shut. Her slow machine was in ruins, and she did not yet understand that the slow machine had never been the real one. Rosier was calm because the failure of the slow way had simply confirmed the necessity of the fast one, and the fast one had never needed Beaumont or the betrothal or the girl's rivalry at all. Those had been the avalanche, loud, bright, drawing every eye, including, he noted with satisfaction, the boy's own formidable attention, which had spent the autumn watching the front and reasoning brilliantly about contracts and rivals, while the quiet thing assembled itself unremarked behind him. He held the door, Rosier murmured, reading Beaumont's terrified account of the candles and the wine and the boy who had picked a Beaumont off the ground without a wand. He held it and aimed it and closed it at will. The window during the power is shut then, as I feared, but he closed it himself, which means he opened it himself, which means he can be made to open it. He set the report down. The Yule Ball. Every champion attends. The boy will be there in dress robes off his guard, surrounded by allies who are also off their guard, in a castle full of strangers where one more is invisible, and the great working needs the core opened. So he will open it the only way left, not by threatening him which closes it, but by threatening the one thing that now at last will make him open it without thinking. He smiled, and it was the smile of a man who had found the last lever. He picked a fool off the girl's arm. He set the candles dancing for her. He just told the whole room plainly that there is exactly one person in the world he will reach the bottom of himself to protect. Rosier rose and crossed to the window and looked north toward a castle full of light. We do not need to catch him caught open. We need only make him open the door himself, for her, at the moment we have chosen, on the ground we have chosen, with the binding already laid. And then the greatest core in the world will open of its own accord in front of us willingly to save a girl, and we will be standing in the doorway when it does. The Delacours prepared to leave the next morning, and the leaving was a different thing than the arriving had been. Sebastian moved through it quietly, a man folded smaller by a single evening, giving instructions to the carriage staff in a voice that had lost its certainty. Apolline did not pack. She sat with her daughters in the warm rear wing, Gabrielle leaning sleepily against her, and when Fleur brought Harry in because Fleur had decided he should be there for this, that there would be no more decisions about him made in rooms he was kept out of, Apolline rose and crossed to him and did the thing that settled it. She took his hands. I argued against you twice, she said. To my own daughter, out of love and out of fear, I made the Enclave's case as well as it has ever been made. I want you to know that I am done making it. Last night I watched my husband try to leash a child, and I watched the child offer him back his own life, and I have chosen my side, and it is yours and Fleur's, and it will not change. She held his gaze. I am still a daughter of the blood, Harry. I know how my people think because I have spent my life thinking as they do. That makes me dangerous to them now on your behalf in a way Fleur cannot be, because I know which doors they will come through and I will be standing in front of them. A faint, fierce smile. I spent 20 years being a good Veela. I find I am going to be a much better trader. Mammon, Fleur said, and there was a wealth in the one word. Do not look so surprised, Apolline said. You did not invent refusing them, my love. You only had the courage to do it out loud. I should have long ago. Better late, she turned back to Harry. Now, there is a hard thing to decide, and I would rather decide it with you in the room than for you. Ondine has not stopped, whatever your father has done. She has only lost her front, which means she will go to the back harder, and a woman who would leash a boy will not balk at using a smaller lever to do it. Her eyes went briefly to the sleepy child at her side, and Harry understood before she said it. Largest lever in this castle is an 8-year-old who has decided she adores you. They will not have her. Send her home, Harry said, somewhere warded before anything else happens. My thought exactly. Pauline stroked Gabrielle's silver hair. There is one place even Ondine cannot move against a child openly, the Enclave's own warded heart where every elder would see it. I will take Gabrielle there myself the morning of the Yule Ball and leave her in the center of the one fortress my people have. Ondine's own walls will guard my daughter against Ondine. I confess I will enjoy that. Harry was quiet for a moment, turning it, and something in the arrangement sat wrong with him. A faint, cold note he could not place, the sense of a plan that was almost too neat. But he had no specific objection, only the instinct, and an instinct without a specific objection was a thing you noted and could not act on. That works, he said slowly. As long as the wards hold against the people inside them as well as outside. They will, Pauline said with a mother's certainty, and Harry let it go, because he had no better answer and the threat to the child was real and present, and the warded heart was, on every visible measure, the safest place in the world. He would remember later that he had felt the wrongness and had not been able to name it, and he would learn from it that an instinct you cannot justify is still data, and that the cost of ignoring it can be very high. He and Fleur walked the grounds afterward in the cold, bright morning while the carriage was readied, and for a while neither of them spoke because there was too much, and because they had both learned that the most valuable things got said in the quiet after you decided not to push. You came into the room, Fleur said at last, when my mother chose her side. You stood there and let a family decide things in front of you instead of about you. She glanced at him. Do you understand how rare that is for me to have arranged? My whole life, the important conversations about me have happened in rooms I was not in. I have spent a year refusing to let them do it to you. And this morning, watching my mother take your hands and choose you, it was the first time I have ever seen a decision about a person made with the person standing in it. Her voice was not quite steady. I did that. I made them put you in the room. It is the proudest thing I have done all year, and it is not even brave. It is only decent, and I am furious that decent should feel so rare. It's not rare because people are cruel, Harry said. It's rare because it's expensive. It's easier to decide about someone than with them. With them, they might say no. He looked at her. You've been paying that cost all year on my behalf for a boy you'd exchanged 40 words with against your whole family and your whole people because it was decent and decent was rare. He stopped walking. I ran the numbers on you in October, you know. Whether you were an ally I could use or a person I could trust, I had a column for each. I kept moving you between them all autumn and it annoyed me because you wouldn't stay put. And now I burned the columns. He said it plainly, which from Harry was an avalanche. You're not in either one, you're just Fleur, the one person I stopped measuring. I didn't decide to. I noticed it had already happened, somewhere around a dragon, and I checked whether it was a mistake, and it wasn't, and that's the whole of it. He met her eyes. I don't have a word for what you are to me. That isn't a column. I'm working on it. Bear with me. Fleur Delacour looked at the boy who measured everything, telling her she was the one thing he had stopped measuring, and understood that he had just said, in the only dialect he had, the thing the blood had been screaming since August, and that neither of them would let the blood claim credit for. Take your time with the word, she said softly. We have it. That is the entire point of what we did last night. We bought ourselves the time to choose it slowly, instead of having it chosen for us fast. She bumped his shoulder with hers, which was as much as either of them would allow in a cold field in view of a carriage. I will tell you when you find the right one. I will know it before you do. I always do. You always do, Harry agreed, almost smiling, and they walked on, two careful people in the cold, having won themselves against an enclave and a ministry and a father's love, the one luxury neither had ever been allowed, the time to choose freely on their own terms with no one's hand on the scale. The carriage left at noon, Gabrielle waving from the window until the powder-blue coach was a speck against the white sky. Pauline would take her south to the warded heart in 3 weeks, the morning of the ball. Sebastian would go back to a ministry and a marriage he had nearly broken for an ambition he no longer recognized. And Harry stood on the steps watching the speck vanish and held, somewhere under everything, the faint, cold, unnameable note of a plan that was almost too neat, and could not, for the life of him, say why. Chapter 5 and Chapter 6, the Yule Ball and the threat Harry asked her himself, which the whole of Hogwarts would later agree was the most shocking thing about it. More shocking than the dragon, more shocking even than the candles in the Beauxbatons carriage that everyone had heard about by now and no one quite believed. He did it plainly in the corridor outside the library with no flowers and no preamble, because Fleur had taught him over the autumn that she despised preamble. The Yule Ball, he said. Champions are expected to open it with a partner. I'd rather go with someone I can stand than someone I have to manage. Come with me. Fleur looked at him for a moment, and a corner of her mouth moved. That is the worst proposal I have ever received, and I have received many from much prettier mouths. I'm aware it's not pretty. I'm offering you the one I think you'll actually say yes to. He held her eyes. No leash, no claim. Two people who'd rather not spend an evening being looked at by everyone else, looking at each other instead. That's the whole offer. Yes, Fleur said, and was a little annoyed at how quickly the word came, and let it come anyway, because the whole point was that she got to. The castle took the news the way a kicked anthill takes a boot. Half of Hogwarts had spent autumn certain that Fleur Delacour was the most beautiful creature ever to cross the lake and the boy-cheat Potter the least deserving person alive, and the collision of the two facts produced a low, constant hum of outrage that Harry walked through with the same flat indifference he'd brought to the Potter Stinks badges. Ron, who had come halfway back to him in the warm aftermath of the dragon, there was a conversation, awkward and brief and real, in which Ron said sorry and Harry said it's fine, and both of them mostly meant it, now goggled at him with an expression caught between betrayal and worship. You're going with her, Ron said, with Fleur Delacour. You, how? Harry said he'd asked, and Ron looked at him as though he'd casually mentioned breathing underwater. Hermione watched the whole thing with the sharp, quiet attention she'd worn since the World Cup, and cornered him on the second to last night before the ball. It's not a strategy, is it? She said. It was not quite a question. You and her. At the start I told myself you found someone useful, an ally, you do that. You make alliances and call them friendships and run the numbers on everyone, even me. Don't pretend you don't. Harry didn't pretend. She'd earned the truth. But this isn't that. You asked her to dance, Harry. You don't do things that aren't useful. So either you've decided she's useful in some way I can't see, or she studied him, or for once you're doing something just because you want to, and I genuinely can't tell which, and that's never happened before. Both, Harry said after a moment, because he decided long ago he would not lie to Hermione again if he could help it, and this was a thing he could give her without giving away the rest. She's the one person here who can't be turned against me by the thing that turns everyone, and I want to. Both are true. I've stopped trying to make them be one thing. He looked at her. You were right at the World Cup. There was something I wasn't telling you. There still is, and it's not safe for you to hold, and I'm sorry. But she holds it already. She had it before I did. So with her, it's not a secret I'm keeping. It's a secret we share. That's the difference, and it's the only one. Hermione was quiet for a long moment. Whatever it is, she said finally, if it goes wrong, you'll tell me in time to help. Promise me that much. Not the secret, just that you won't be alone with it when it breaks. I promise, Harry said, and this time he was not lying, and they both knew it, and something that had been bent between them since August quietly straightened. He knew the ball was the trap before he had any evidence for it, which troubled him because Harry distrusted conclusions that arrived before their evidence. But the logic was clean. The slow way had failed, Beaumont rooted, the betrothal dead, Sebastian turned. Undine's machine was wrecked, and a wrecked slow plan against an enemy as competent as the one he'd inferred behind Undine did not mean the danger was over. It meant the danger had changed shape. Whoever stood behind the Enclave's hardliner, the outsider, the forbidden knowledge, the hand Harry had named rosier on a guess that fit too well to ignore, would not simply give up the greatest core in the world because a marriage hadn't worked. He would stop trying to acquire it gently and start trying to take it. And to take a core, the account said, Fleur had given him this, white-faced, in a stolen hour in the library stacks, reading from notes her mother had copied in defiance of the Enclave. You needed it open. Caught open in sleep or distraction or the flood of an untrained surge. But Harry's surges weren't untrained anymore. He held his own door now. So the sleep and distraction windows were the ones that remained, and the largest, most predictable distraction of the winter, the one night every champion would be tired and dressed up and off guard and surrounded by 1,000 strangers in a castle thrown open to outsiders, was the Yule Ball. They will not threaten you, Fleur had said in the stacks, tracing the cramped lines of her mother's hand. That is the part you must understand, Harry. The accounts are clear. A threatened core closes. If anyone points a wand at you, your power locks shut and cannot be taken. It is the oldest defense there is, older than thought, so they will not come at you. To open your door they need you to open it, willingly, without thinking. She had looked up at him, and the fear in her had been entirely for him, which means they will not threaten you. They will threaten the thing that makes you open the door without thinking. They will threaten someone you would reach the bottom of yourself to save. They had both understood in the cold of the stacks who that was. There were, in truth, 3 people in the castle Harry would open the door for without a heartbeat's hesitation, and 2 of them, Fleur and now Hermione, were old enough and sharp enough to be hard to take. The third had silver hair and was 8 years old and had asked him, fearless, whether he was going to marry her sister. Gabrielle goes home, Harry had said immediately, before the ball. Back over the mountains, somewhere warded, somewhere they can't reach her. My mother has already arranged it, Fleur said. She leaves the morning of the ball. Mammon saw it the moment you did sooner. She has not stopped being a Veela, Harry. She knows exactly how her own people would think because she has spent her life among them. Gabrielle will be in the Enclave's own warded heart by nightfall, the one place even Undine cannot move against a child without the whole council seeing. A flicker of grim satisfaction. Undine's own walls will protect her from Undine. Mammon enjoyed that, I think, more than she has enjoyed anything in months, so the obvious lever was being removed, which was good and which Harry did not trust because removing the obvious lever only forced a competent enemy to a less obvious one, and a less obvious lever was, by definition, the one he hadn't thought of yet. He spent the 3 days before the ball trying to think of it and could not, and that was the thing that kept him awake, not fear of the trap, but the cold certainty that he was being outprepared by someone who had been planning this for months, while Harry had spent the autumn watching the loud, bright avalanche of Beaumont and the betrothal. He had let the front do its work. He had been the smartest person in the castle, reasoning brilliantly about contracts and rivals and clocks, and the whole time the quiet thing had been assembling behind him exactly as it was meant to, unremarked, because his formidable attention had been pointed at the noise. The realization came to him at 2 in the morning, 2 nights before the ball in the cold storeroom, and it was so simple and so ugly that he sat very still with it for a long time. The avalanche hadn't been Beaumont. Beaumont was too obvious to be the real distraction. Even Ondine couldn't have thought Harry would take him seriously. The avalanche was the whole enclave plot: Ondine, the betrothal, the rival, the family pressure, the entire visible war over whether Harry would be married into the blood. That had been the front, loud, bright, drawing every eye, including his. And behind it, quiet, the thing he'd been missing all along, the man he'd never seen, the outsider, the one who didn't care about marriage or the blood or the enclave's future at all and only wanted the core bound, harnessed for himself. 2 boards, Harry had told Fleur in October. He'd been right and hadn't understood his own rightness. The enclave's board marriage, blood, claim, and a second player's board binding, theft, power, and the second player had been using the first board as cover the entire time, letting Ondine's loud doomed marriage war occupy everyone while he laid his quiet working underneath it. And there was a third board still. There was always the third. Mad-Eye Moody, who had put Harry's name in a cup of fire and taught him, helpfully, truthfully, to hold his own door. Moody, who wanted Harry trained and tested and pushed, for reasons that had nothing to do with marriage or binding either. 3 hands, 3 appetites, and the Yule Ball 2 nights off with all 3 of them. Harry was suddenly certain, intending to make their move in the same crowded dark, each thinking the night was theirs. He told Fleur in the morning. He told her all of it, the front, the second board, the third, and she listened the way he listened, completely, and at the end she was pale. Then we do not walk into it blind, she said. If it is the ball, and it is, then we choose what we can. We keep each other in sight all night. We do not let ourselves be separated. That is the oldest trap, the separation. They will try to draw one of us off. And we decide now, before the music and the dressing and the 1,000 strangers, what we will do when it springs. She held his eyes. Because it will spring, Harry. We have removed Gabrielle. We have named the boards. But a man who has planned this for months has planned for us to know we are walking into a trap and has built the trap to work anyway. That is what frightens me, not that we do not see it, that he does not need us not to see it. I know, Harry said. I've been thinking the same thing for 2 days. He looked at her. So we don't try to avoid the trap. We can't. He's accounted for our avoiding it. We do the other thing. Cold light came into him. We spring it on purpose where we choose, on terms we set with him, thinking he chose the ground. He's built a trap that works even though we see it. Fine, I'll build one that works even though he sees me build it. 2 can play the long game, Delacour. He's just had more practice. He hasn't had me. The great hall on Christmas night had been turned to silver and ice, frost glittering, 1,000 floating candles caught in a ceiling of falling snow that vanished before it landed, and Harry walked into it with Fleur Delacour on his arm and felt the whole room turn, and did not care because he had stopped, somewhere this autumn, being able to be made to care what a room thought of him. There was no tactical word for it, and Harry was briefly annoyed at himself for reaching for one. She wore silver gray that caught the frostlight, and she had put off the allure entirely, deliberately, all of it, so that what crossed the hall on Harry's arm was not a force but a girl, tall and bright and choosing to be seen as herself, and the not using it was the most beautiful thing about her because she'd done it for him, who didn't need it switched off and would have been unmoved either way, which was exactly why she could finally switch it off at all. Stop looking at me like a problem you're enjoying, Fleur murmured as they took the floor for the champions' dance. I'm not. I'm looking at you like a person I chose to look at. Harry put his hand at her waist and discovered he knew how to dance, which Hermione had spent a frantic, exasperated week ensuring. There's a difference. You taught it to me. The dance was the warm beat, the one Harry would let himself have because he had decided coldly that a person about to walk into a trap should first stand for 3 minutes in the one good thing he was fighting to keep, so that he remembered, when the ugliness came, what it was for. So he let himself have it. 3 minutes turning under the vanishing snow, with the one person in the world his power answered to and his weakness couldn't be used by, the 2 of them moving together while 1,000 people watched and neither of them watched the 1,000. He did not narrate it to himself. He did not analyze it. For 3 minutes he simply danced with Fleur Delacour and was, against every expectation his life had taught him, happy. Whatever happens tonight, Fleur said quietly near the end of it, her mouth close to his ear so the watching room could not hear, I want it on the record between us before the ugliness that I chose this. You, not the blood's choice, mine. I would have walked across that lawn for you in October if the enclave had never existed, if there were no worthy one and no dying people and no claim at all. I worked it out a week ago and I have been waiting for a moment to say it where no one could pretend it was the instinct talking. She drew back enough to look at him. There, now it is said and it is mine and they can choke on it. Same, Harry said, and this time he found more words because she'd earned them and because he might not get another quiet minute to spend them in. I spent my whole life learning not to want things I couldn't have because wanting cost too much. You're the first thing I've let myself want in years. I ran the numbers. The numbers said don't, too dangerous, too exposed, too much to lose. I'm doing it anyway. That's never happened. So whatever's coming, I chose it too, with my eyes open. The numbers be damned. The music ended. The room applauded, not knowing what it was applauding. And Harry Potter and Fleur Delacour stepped off the floor together, by choice, into the trap they both knew was waiting, having first taken 3 minutes to be sure of exactly what they were about to fight to keep. It came an hour later, and it did not come the way either of them had planned for, because Gaspard Rosier had, as Fleur feared, planned for them to be ready, and had built the trap to work anyway, and the lever he reached for was not the one they had removed. It was the one they had not thought to. Fleur went down between one breath and the next, and Harry caught her before she hit the floor. It was not a feint. He knew that instantly because her eyes were open and fixed on nothing, and her hands had locked on his arms hard enough to bruise, and her lips were moving around a single word in French that he did not need to translate. Gabrielle, 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 Fleur, look at me, what do you see? They have her. Her voice came from very far away, the voice of someone reading a thing written on the inside of her own skull. The blood, we are bound, sisters, I feel her, Harry, they have her. She is not in the enclave, she is cold, stone, a circle drawn in light, she is so frightened. Her focus snapped back into her eyes all at once, and she gripped him harder. The enclave was the trap. We sent her to the enclave's warded heart to keep her from Ondine, and Ondine is the enclave. The wards that would stop a stranger taking a child do nothing against the elder who keeps the wards. We did not hide her from them. We delivered her to them, gift-wrapped, the morning of the night they needed her. The horror in her face was total. It was the lever we did not think of. We removed the obvious one and walked her straight into his hand. Harry's mind went very cold and very fast. The safe place was the trap, of course it was. Rosier had let them remove Gabrielle from the castle, had wanted them to, had counted on Apolline's instinct to send the child to the one place that felt safe, which was the one place Ondine ruled. He hadn't needed to catch Harry caught open during the power, or asleep, or distracted. He built a lever Harry would pull himself with his whole heart at a time and place of Rosier's choosing, an 8-year-old girl on a circle drawn in light, and the only currency that would buy her back the deliberate opening of the greatest core in the world. Where, Harry said, I can find her. Fleur was on her feet, swaying, gripping his arm. The bond, I can feel the direction like a compass it pulls, north and east of here, not far, a place of old stone. Her eyes were wild and clearing fast into something terrible and focused. Harry, this is the trap. This is exactly the trap. The instant we go to her, his hand closes. We would be walking into the binding ground with the lever already pulled. We must not. We're going, Harry said. Obviously we're going. There was never a version of this where we didn't go, and he knows that, which is the whole point of taking her. He was already moving, drawing Fleur with him toward the side doors, away from the crowd, his mind laying track ahead of his feet. He has built a trap that works even though we see it. I told you I'd build one that works even though he sees me. I've had 3 days. Listen to me fast because we don't get to plan this twice, he told her low and quick, crossing the dark grounds with the ball's music fading behind them and the snow coming down for real out here. No enchantment, cold and wet and serious. He told her the shape of what he meant to do, and she listened, and twice she said no, and once she said that is insane, and at the end she said, white and fierce, if it goes wrong it kills you, and Harry said, if it goes right, freeze all 3 of us, and I've run it 40 ways and right is the likeliest, and we're out of time, and Fleur Delacour looked at the boy she had chosen and made the last free choice of the night. Then we do it your way, she said, and God help him. The binding ground was an old stone circle on a hill northeast of the castle, beyond the wards, beyond the lake, a ring of standing stones older than Hogwarts that had been there when the moor was young, and the snow had stopped falling inside the ring though it fell everywhere else, which told Harry that the working was already laid. Gabrielle stood at the center, inside a circle drawn in cold blue light, and she was not bound and not gagged, and that was somehow worse. She had simply been put there, a frightened 8-year-old in her nightdress in the snow, held by nothing but the light and the certainty of the adults around her, and when she saw Fleur she cried out and the whole of Harry went to ice. Ondine stood at the circle's edge, and she was magnificent and terrible, allure pouring off her in waves that broke on Harry like surf and rolled over Fleur with no more effect than weather, 2 Veela facing each other across a child and a working. And beside Ondine, calm, courteous, untroubled, in a traveling cloak with his hands folded, stood a man Harry had never seen and knew at once, because the man fit the shape Harry had been carrying since October. Harry Potter, said Gaspard Rosier. I confess I am glad to meet you at last. I have admired your work all autumn, the dragon especially. You have no idea how inconvenient your competence has been. He inclined his head. I had hoped to take your core caught open, you see, in the careless flood of an untrained boy. You declined to be careless. You taught yourself to hold your own door in a single season, which I'm told has never been done and which closed every window I had." He gestured gently at the child in the circle. "And so I have been forced to a cruder instrument than I prefer. You will open the door yourself for her, because there is no version of you that lets this child die to keep a power you never asked for. I have read you, Mr. Potter, as carefully as you read everyone, and that is the one place you cannot be cold. You will open your core to save her willingly, completely, and the working is laid to take it the instant you do." He spread his hands. "I am sorry. It is nothing personal. It is simply the most valuable thing in the world, and you cannot be allowed to keep it." "Ondine," Fleur said, not to Rosier, her voice shaking with fury, "do you see what he is? Do you see what you have brought into the blood? You wanted to save our people, and you have brought a wizard to bind a child in our own sacred ring." "I have brought our people their future," Ondine said, but her eyes flicked once to Rosier, and Harry saw the flick and understood that some part of Ondine had begun too late to be afraid of her partner. "When it is done, Fleur, you will understand. A core bound serves better than a core when we will not need to beg him. We will simply have him." "You will have nothing," Rosier said, so pleasantly that Ondine did not in the moment hear it. Harry stepped forward to the edge of the blue circle and looked at Gabrielle, and the child looked back at him and her lips moved. "Are you going to save me?" He had told her a rule once in a wrecked carriage. He had told her that you should only do a thing if you chose it, and no one made you. He looked at the 8-year-old in the snow and understood that Rosier had built a trap out of Harry's own goodness, had reached past every defense to the one true thing Fleur had named months ago, the kindness he protected most because it had cost him most, and had made it the lever that would end him. So Harry did the thing Rosier had not planned for, because it was the one thing a man who reads everyone cannot plan for. He had been honest with the one person it mattered to in advance, and she had agreed to the insane part. "Here's what you got wrong," Harry said to Rosier conversationally, and opened the door. He did not open it the way Rosier expected, not the desperate flood of a boy reaching the bottom of himself to save a child, the wide helpless surge the working was laid to catch. Opened it as he had learned to on the rock in front of the dragon, throttled, held a sliver, controlled, his hand on the door the entire time. And the binding laid to seize a flood, closed on a thread, caught a fraction of what it had been built to take, sank its hooks into the edge of a core whose owner was, at that very instant, holding the rest of it shut by will, so that instead of the whole sea Rosier got a cupful, a tether, a hook in the surf line, and nothing of the deep. It was enough to hurt. Harry felt the working bite, felt the hook sink into the rim of him, felt something foreign, close, cold fingers on the outermost edge of his power, and he held the door against it, gasping on his feet, the binding scrabbling at a core that would not open the rest of the way, no matter how it pulled. And in the half-second of Rosier's surprise, the half-second a man who has read everyone spends realizing he has been read back, Harry did the second thing, the thing he and Fleur had spent the cold walk arranging, the thing that needed Rosier looking at Harry and not at the girl beside him. Fleur broke the circle from the inside. She had not been standing beside Harry by accident. She had been standing where her hand could reach the blue light at the moment Rosier's attention was nailed to the boy opening his core, and she did not attack Rosier, and she did not attack Ondine. She attacked the working, the one thing in the ring that was made of Veela craft, the enclave magic Ondine had woven into the binding to bridge wizard power and blood. Fleur was the strongest daughter the blood had produced in 100 years, and the compulsion craft in that circle was her own people's, and a thing made of your own blood's magic answers to the strongest blood in the ring. She seized the working from within, the way Ondine had never imagined a daughter could, and she did not break it cleanly. There was no time, and it was vast, but she broke the part that mattered, the part that held Gabrielle and the part that fed the binding its bridge. The blue circle shattered. Gabrielle stumbled free into the snow, and Fleur had her, swept up, shielded in the same motion that broke the light. And Rosier's beautiful working, deprived of its bridge mid-bite, did not complete. It did not take the core. It got what it had already hooked, the thread, the tether, the cold fingers on the rim, and there it stuck, half done, neither releasing nor closing, a binding begun and not finished, a leash with no one yet holding the other end. "Run," Harry said to Fleur with the child, and Fleur ran because they had agreed she would, because the child came first and they had decided it cold and clear on the walk, and a plan you have agreed to in advance is a plan you can execute when your whole heart is screaming to do otherwise. Which left Harry alone in a broken circle with a French dark wizard and a Veela elder and half a binding sunk into his core. And that was, precisely, the part of the plan that had made Fleur say it kills you. Rosier did not rage. That was the thing Harry would remember, the thing that told him exactly how dangerous the man was. His working had failed, his prize had walked, the child was gone, and Gaspard Rosier simply adjusted, calm as a man stepping around a puddle. "Half," Rosier said, almost admiring, looking at the broken light, at the thread that joined him faintly now to the boy. "You let me take half to keep me from taking all, knowing I could not complete it without the bridge, and you had the girl ready to break the bridge the instant I committed." He nodded slowly. That is very good. That is genuinely very good, Mr. Potter. I have not been outthought in a long time. The hook in Harry's core tugged, testing, and Harry held the door and felt the tug answer the man across the ring. But you understand what you have done. You did not stop the binding. You delayed it. The tether is set. I hold the beginning of a leash, and a leash begun can be finished, not tonight, not here, but at a time of my choosing, when next your door is forced wide, and I assure you I am patient, and your tournament has one task left, and it is the most dangerous of all. He smiled. I will simply wait. You cannot remove what I have set. The craft is beyond you, and the one person who might break it has just run into the dark with a child. So we are joined now, you and I, by a thread, and one day soon you will open your door all the way to save someone. You cannot help it. It is what you are, and on that day I will be holding the other end. Maybe, Harry said. He was gray and swaying and holding his door against a hook that pulled at the rim of him, and he was, underneath all of it, calm, because the third thing was about to happen, and the third thing was the only part of the plan he hadn't told even Fleur, because the third thing he hadn't planned at all. He'd only known it would come. But you've made the same mistake everyone makes with me, Rosier. You think there are two of us in this ring. He looked past the man to the dark beyond the stones, where a wooden leg had begun, very quietly, to thud across the frozen ground. There were always three boards. You were just never on the only one that mattered. Mad-Eye Moody came into the ring. He came with his wand up and his magical eye blazing, and Ondine turned on him with a cry, and Rosier spun. And for one instant the elder and the dark wizard faced a third hand neither of them had accounted for, and Harry, watching Moody's face in the snow light, understood the last piece of it, the piece he'd been circling since October, the piece that snapped into place now with a click he felt in his teeth. Moody's magical eye had found Harry's core flaring from across the grounds. Moody had come not to save Harry, and not to stop Rosier for any good man's reason. Moody had come because someone else wanted the boy's power, a third master, older and worse than Rosier, and a binding sunk into Harry's core by freelance French dark wizard was an obstacle to that master's plans. Harry watched the realization cross his own mind and go cold. The man who put my name in the cup wants me delivered whole to someone at the end of this tournament, and Rosier's tether is a thing in his way, and he has just arrived to remove it. Rosier, Moody said, and his voice was not quite Moody's, had a thinness under it that Harry had heard once before in a glassy-eyed ministry man at the weighing of the wands and not understood. You reach above your station. The boy is spoken for. My master does not share. And he attacked not Harry, not yet, but Rosier, a curse like green lightning that Rosier turned at the last instant with a shield that sang. And then the ring was full of fire, and the two of them were dueling across the broken circle, a French dark wizard and a thing wearing a teacher's face, each intent on a prize that belonged to neither, and Ondine screaming, and the standing stones lit from within by spellfire. And Harry, forgotten for 3 full seconds in the collision of his two lesser enemies, did the only sane thing a piece can do when the players are busy killing each other over the board. He left. He went out of the ring low and fast, the way he'd left the dragon, the tether dragging cold at the rim of his core and his door held shut against it by main force. And he ran down the hill through the real snow toward the lights of the castle, where Fleur and Gabrielle had gone, and behind him the old stones flickered with the light of two of his enemies trying to destroy each other. And he ran and did not look back and held his door and lived. They came together in the dark at the edge of the lake, the three of them, Harry and Fleur and the child between them, snow-soaked and shaking and alive. You are bound, Fleur said the moment she saw his face, her hands going to him, reading the gray of him, the way he held himself rigid around the cold thread in his core. Half, I felt it take, Harry, half, Harry agreed. A tether. Rosier holds the start of a leash and he means to finish it at the third task, the next time my door is forced wide. He was breathing hard and calm and his eyes were very bright. And Moody's not Moody. There's a third master, the worst one, and Moody put my name in the cup to deliver me to him at the end of the tournament whole, and he just attacked Rosier in that ring because Rosier's tether is in his way. They're killing each other over me up on that hill right now. He almost laughed, gray and fierce. 3 hands, Fleur, the enclave that wants me wed, the wizard that wants me bound. And the thing in the cup that wants me delivered. And tonight I made the second one show himself and the third one show himself and got Gabrielle out and let the two of them collide. We sprang the trap on our terms. We didn't win, but we know the whole board now, all three, and they don't know that we know. Fleur stared at him. That was the plan, to get them to attack each other. That was the hope. I knew Moody's eye would find my core if I flared it. He's been watching me all year through walls. I gambled he'd come and that whatever he wanted me for would put him at odds with whatever Rosier wanted me for, because two people who both want to own the same thing are never really allies. Harry looked up the dark hill, where the spellfire had begun now to die. I just didn't know which of them would win, and I still don't. But it doesn't matter, because whichever of them walks off that hill tonight, he walks off weaker, and he walks off having shown me his face, and the third task is months away, and I'm going to spend every one of those months learning to open my door all the way. His hand went to his chest, to the cold thread sunk in the rim of him. Because here's what they all got wrong, all three of them. They think this tether owns me now, a leash with the start of a knot in it. His eyes came back to Fleur, and there was something in them she had not seen before, something that had been forged in the broken ring tonight and would not be unmade. But a leash runs both ways, Fleur. He sank a hook into my core to control me. He's joined himself to the most powerful thing in the world by a thread, and the next time my door opens, all the way on purpose, by my will and not his, that thread won't carry his binding into me. His voice dropped. It'll carry my power into him. Fleur understood slowly what he was telling her and what it would cost and what it would mean, and her arms tightened around her sister. You are going to let him finish the binding, she breathed. At the third task, you are going to let Rosier think he has won and open your door all the way down the leash he made and give him exactly what he asked for, Harry said softly. All of it, everything he spent 30 years trying to steal a cupful of. The whole sea down the thread he sank into me himself all at once. He looked at her, gray and steady and absolutely certain. He wanted the greatest core in the world. He's going to get it. He's just not going to survive having it. Across the lake, the last of the spellfire guttered out atop the hill, and one figure, Harry could not tell which, walked alone down through the snow and was gone. The balls still glittered behind them, 1,000 candles in a frost-bright hall full of people who would never know what had happened on the moor while they danced. And on the dark shore 3 people stood together, snow-soaked and alive, joined now by choices freely made and by a cold thread that one of them meant to turn into a blade. And somewhere to the south, an old matriarch by a dying fire was about to learn that her hardliner had brought a wizard into the sacred ring to bind a child, and that her people's whole future now turned on whether a 14-year-old British boy could do the most dangerous thing any wizard had ever attempted, and live. The winter deepened toward the third task, and Harry Potter began at last to learn to open the door all the way. Chapter 6 and Chapter 7. Claiming on their own terms, Harry learned to open the door all the way in a disused storeroom on the 4th floor, over the long gray months between Christmas and June, and Fleur Delacour taught him, because it turned out there was, after all, exactly one person in the world who knew how to teach him, and did not want to keep him. It was not the Enclave's way. The Enclave's way was reverence and ritual and the slow, careful drawing out of power across years, and they had no years. It was Fleur's way, which she invented as she went, because the tether in Harry's core was made of her own people's craft and she could read it from the inside, and what she read taught them both the shape of the thing Rosier had done and, slowly, the shape of how to turn it. The binding is a thread, she said the first night, her hand flat over his sternum where the cold hook sat sunk in the rim of him. He sank it into the edge of your core to draw your power out down the thread into himself. That is what a binding does. It makes you a well someone else may lower a bucket into. He has the bucket. He is waiting for the day your door opens wide enough that the bucket can reach the deep. Her eyes met his. You mean to send the whole sea up the thread instead? To open the door so wide and so fast that the bucket is not lowered into you, you are poured into the bucket, all of it, more than the thread was ever made to carry. She did not soften it. Harry, the accounts have a word for a core open that far, that fast, on purpose. They call it the last opening, because no one has ever done it and lived. The door is not meant to open all the way. There is no bottom to it. Open it fully, you may not be able to close it, and a core that cannot close empties, and a wizard whose core empties dies. Then you'll teach me to close it, Harry said. That's the part. Not opening, anyone can fall down a well. Closing, you hold a door for me when I can't. You've done it once already in the ring. You broke a working from inside that no one thought a daughter could touch. I open it all the way down the thread into Rosier. You slam it shut behind me before I empty. That's the plan. That's the whole plan. It only works with 2. Fleur was quiet for a long moment. It only works with 2, she repeated. You understand what you're saying. You spent your whole life learning to need no one because needing was a tax you could not afford. And the plan you have built to save yourself is a plan that does not work unless you put your life in my hands and trust that I will be holding the door. A corner of her mouth moved, fierce and wet-eyed. You absolute fool. You have gone and made yourself the one thing you swore you never would, dependent on me. On you, Harry agreed. Specifically, no one else. I ran the numbers. He looked at her steadily. Turns out there's exactly one person the numbers say I can bet my life on. I don't know when that happened. I noticed it had already happened. So yes, I'm dependent on you on purpose, with my eyes open. A breath. It's the most frightening thing I've ever done, and I'd rather do it than open that door alone, and I think that's the whole of what people mean when they use the word I've spent my life refusing to use. Fleur Delacour kissed him then, once, careful and certain, the first and only time all winter, and it was not the blood, and it was not the allure, and it was not anything anyone had arranged. It was 2 people who had each crossed a long way to refuse to be owned, choosing freely to belong to each other anyway, on terms no enclave had written and no leash could hold. Say it, she said against his mouth. The word, I want to hear you use it once since you have come this far. I love you, Harry said, who had never said it to anyone because no one had ever stayed long enough to be told. That's the word, I love you, and I'm betting my life on you, and those are the same sentence. Good, Fleur said unsteadily, because I love you too, and I chose it, and now hold still and learn to open the door, because if you die in that maze I will follow you into death and be extremely unpleasant about it. They trained every night until June. The second task came in the cold black heart of February, and it taught Harry two things, one about the tournament and one about himself, and he valued the second more. He had cracked the golden egg in January. Ron's bath-singing crack had been the key, the screech becoming a song the moment Harry held the thing under the bathwater, and so he knew before the morning what the Merpeople's verse meant, that something he would sorely miss had been taken and hidden an hour deep in the Black Lake, and that he had an hour to get it back. He understood, reading the verse, exactly whom the judges had taken. Gabrielle was warded and far away. There was only one person in the world Harry Potter would sorely miss, and she would be down in the cold dark with the others, and Harry found that the knowledge did not frighten him the way the judges had intended. It clarified him. The lake in February was a thing out of an old grief, black water under a skin of ice, the cold of it a pressure on the chest before you were even in. Harry went in with Gillyweed begged from a startled Neville, and the plant remade his throat and webbed his hands, and he went down into a dark that the surface light gave up on 20 feet from the top, and the cold closed over him like a second skin, and he swam. He did not race the others. He had learned with the dragon that the score was not the game. He found the Merpeople's village an hour deep, a ghost town of weed and stone, and there in the murk 4 figures hung suspended and sleeping, bound by the ankle to the lake bed, pale as drowned things Cho, a small dark-haired girl for Crumb, a Hufflepuff boy and Fleur. Silver hair drifting in the black water like something burning underwater. Sleep enchanted, breathing water, perfectly safe, and Harry's whole chest still went tight at the sight of her down here in the cold dark where the drowned things were, because some certainties are older than reason. The Merpeople guarded them with spears, and the rule that each champion took only his own. Cedric came and went with Cho. Crumb came, half transfigured into something with a shark's head, and took the small, dark girl. Fleur did not come. Harry understood why before he let himself feel it. The Grindylows, the dark water, something had stopped her, somewhere up in the murk between here and the surface, and the hour was running out, and the Merpeople would not let him take a hostage who was not his to take. And the Hufflepuff boy hung there too, and no one was coming for him because his champion had not made it down at all. Harry made a decision that the judges would dock him points for, and that he would never, for one instant, regret. He cut Fleur free, his own, his to take, his to bring up out of the cold dark where the drowned things were, and then he cut the Hufflepuff boy free too, over the Merpeople's leveled spears, and he held them both, one in each arm, a girl with silver hair and a stranger's child, and when the spears came down he did the thing he had spent the winter learning. He cracked the door a sliver, throttled, his hand on it the whole time, and let a single controlled pulse of pressure roll out from him through the black water, and the Merpeople were not hurt and were not threatened, but they were moved, swept gently back, a tide pushing reeds, long enough for a boy with 2 people in his arms to kick up off the lake bed and rise toward the distant gray coin of the surface. He came up into the cold air an hour and some minutes after he'd gone down, last of all the champions, a girl under one arm and a stranger's brother under the other, and the stands roared at the sight of it, the boy who'd come up last because he'd refused to leave anyone in the dark. Fleur came awake against him in the freezing water, the enchantment breaking as the air hit her, and her first conscious act was to grip his shoulder hard enough to bruise, and her first conscious word was his name, and her second, when she understood where she was and who else he was holding, was, "You brought the boy. He was not even yours to bring." No one was coming for him, Harry said, treading the black water, holding them both up. I wasn't going to leave a kid in the dark because a rule said he was someone else's problem. He was blue with cold and grinning. Besides, the judges already know I don't play their game. Why disappoint them? Fleur looked at the boy holding her and a stranger up out of the cold lake, and she did not say thank you because people like Fleur did not say thank you. She said the thing underneath it, treading water in the February dark. That, she said, is the second time you have refused to do the expected thing in front of the whole world, and the second time it has been the most beautiful thing I have ever watched a person do, and I am beginning to think it is not a strategy at all. I think it is simply who you are when no one is making you be anyone else. Her teeth were chattering and her eyes were not cold at all. I felt you down in the dark, even asleep. The pulse you used on the Merpeople, gentle, held, aimed so it moved them and harmed nothing. You have learned to be careful with it, to be kind with it. Do you understand how rare that is, Harry, for a power that large to learn to be gentle? Most never do. Most learn only to be strong. She pressed her forehead to his shoulder in the freezing water in front of 100,000 people and did not care. I am going to spend my life with the only great power I have ever met that taught itself to be kind. I decided it just now, coming up out of the dark in your arms. Take your time with the word. I have found mine. They got out of the lake into towels and a roaring crowd, and the judges deducted points and awarded them anyway, and Harry placed neither first nor last but somewhere in the middle that no one remembered, because the only thing anyone remembered from the second task was the boy who came up last with 2 people in his arms, and the part only Fleur knew, which was that somewhere an hour deep in the black water, he had used the most dangerous power in the world to push a row of spears gently aside without harming a soul, and had thereby proven the one thing that mattered more than all his strength, that he could be trusted with it. The Enclave's hold broke in March in the high stone hall, and it broke because Fleur Delacour finally said aloud the thing she had crossed the mountains to say. She brought Fleur with her, and she brought Gabrielle, who had been kept inside the warded heart all winter, and who walked into the council hall on her own small feet and stood before the fire, and was herself the whole of the argument no words could have made. Seraphine looked at the child she had not known was taken, and Apolline told the council plainly without mercy what had happened on a snow-bright hill at Christmas, that Ondine had brought a wizard, a rosier, a dark and forbidden hand into the people's own sacred ring, and had stood a daughter of the blood, 8 years old, inside a binding circle drawn in cold light, as bait to bind a child's terror into a working that would enslave a boy's core. The hall went silent in a way it had not gone silent in 100 years. That is a lie, Ondine said, but she said it a half-second too late, and Seraphine, who had spent 60 years reading the half-seconds of the woman at her right hand, heard the lateness and knew. Bring me the working, Seraphine said quietly, the binding craft. Show me your hands, Ondine, and let the fire read them, as is our oldest right, and we will see whether a daughter of this hall stood a child in a circle of forbidden light. And Ondine, who could lie to a council but could not lie to the fire that had read the blood since before the Grindelwald War, said nothing, and the nothing was louder than any confession. Seraphine rose. She was very old, and she had carried her people slow dying for a lifetime, and she had said once by the same fire that she would rather be destroyed as something other than slavers, and now she stood and looked at the daughter who had tried to make liars of that vow, and her voice when it came was the voice of the whole long memory of her kind. We are dying, Seraphine said to the hall. That is true. I have watched the fire dim my whole life, and I have grieved it as none of you can yet grieve it. And in my grief I let myself send a foolish boy and a beautiful threat and an ambitious father against a child who had done us no wrong, I who knew better, because I wanted the future so badly I let myself stop watching the means by which we reached for it. Her eyes went to Ondine. But I never crossed this line. I never made us the thing the wizards have feared for 1,000 years. You did. You took our oldest sacred craft and turned it into a slaver's chain, and you stood a daughter of the blood in it to bait the trap, and you brought a rosier into the ring to hold the other end. She lifted her hand. Ondine of the council, you are cast out, your name is struck from the fire. You will not sit at this hall again, and the protection of the blood is withdrawn from you, and whatever becomes of you now, you go to it alone, having sold the future you claimed to serve to a wizard who never meant to share it. He will give it to me, Ondine said, wild now, the mask gone entirely. Rosier, when the boy's core is bound at the last task, he will give me my share, he swore. He swore, said Seraphine with the terrible pity of the very old, and you believed him because you had stopped being able to imagine being deceived. A bound core answers to one hand, child. There is no share, there was never a share. You sold our future for a lie, and you will not even have the lie. She turned from her finally to Apolline, to Fleur, to the child by the fire. The claim is withdrawn tonight. Holy, there's no betrothal, no securing, no bringing into the blood. The boy is no asset of this hall and never was, and I am ashamed it took a child in a circle to teach me what your daughter understood in a single autumn. Her ancient eyes found Fleur. You felt him first and strongest, and we tried to make that into a chain, and you would not let us, and you were right. If anything is ever to be between you and the worthy one, it will be your free choice and his, and the Enclave will bless it if it comes and hold its peace if it does not, and that is the whole of what we should ever have offered. A breath. Tell me, daughter, have you chosen? I have, said Fleur, freely, with my eyes open. I love him and he loves me, and no one made either of us, and that is the only marriage of the blood I will ever accept, the kind that needs no counsel at all. And the younger Veela of the council, who had watched the whole of it, who had grown up being told they were a dying people and a beautiful memory and an instrument of survival. The younger ones rose one by one and went to stand behind Fleur Delacour, because she had shown them a thing none of the elders ever had, that the blood could choose and be chosen and be free, and that a people did not have to become a cage to keep from going out. The Enclave's hold broke that night, not with a battle, but with an old woman's shame and a young woman's choice, and Ondine went out into the dark alone with nothing but a dark wizard's lie, and the future of the Veela passed quietly into hands that would not make it a chain. But Ondine was not the danger, and Rosier was still loose, and there remained the third hand, the worst one, the thing wearing a teacher's face, and Harry had spent the whole grey winter making sure all 3 of them would be in the same place on the same night, because the only thing better than defeating your enemies one at a time was arranging for them to arrive together and ruin each other. He had learned by spring who Moody was. It had taken months of patient watching, the flask the man drank from on the hour, the map of his absences, The single afternoon Harry had risked everything to follow him and seen the face flicker, for one instant, into a younger and hungrier one before the hour's draft restored it. Barty Crouch the Younger, presumed dead, alive and polyjuiced into the Auror who hunted his own kind, here on one errand only, to deliver Harry Potter at the end of the maze by a portkey laid into the Triwizard Cup, to a master who was not yet a body and meant to become one with Harry's blood. Harry did not warn the school. That was the cold calculation, and he made it with his eyes open and told Fleur and only Fleur. If he warned Dumbledore, Crouch would be arrested, the portkey removed, the plot foiled, and Rosier would still be loose, and Ondine and the tether would still be sunk in Harry's core waiting for the day his door was forced, and Harry would spend the rest of his life with Alicia and him and two enemies in the dark. One clean night, he told Fleur, all three on the same ground, each thinking it is theirs. Crouch lays his portkey. Rosier comes for the binding the moment my door opens. And I open it all the way and end it, all of it, once. It is insane, Fleur said for the second time that year. It's the only version where I'm free at the end instead of hunted, Harry said. Free of the tether, free of Rosier, free of whatever's waiting at the end of Crouch's portkey. One night, one opening, you hold the door. He looked at her. You said it only works with two. It does, so I need to ask you the thing I've never asked anyone. A breath. Will you be there at the maze? Outside, where I can reach you down the thread when I open it. I can't close the door myself, not at the last opening, no one can. I need to know that when I pour the whole sea into Rosier and start to empty, there's a hand on the door that loves me enough to slam it shut before I'm gone. His voice did not shake. I'm asking you to hold my life out loud on purpose, because that's what the word means and I've decided to mean it. Fleur Delacour looked at the boy who had spent his whole life learning to need no one, asking her out loud to be the one thing he needed. Yes, she said, I will be there, I will hold the door, and you will come back through it, Harry Potter, because I will not accept any other outcome, and the blood made me very, very strong, and I have finally found a thing worth being strong for. She took his hand. Now, the third task is in 3 days. Tell me everything, where I stand, what I watch for. What I do when it goes wrong, because it will go wrong, it always goes wrong, and the plans that survive are the ones built to go wrong and win anyway. So they built it, the two of them, in the last 3 nights of the long gray winter, a trap for 3 enemies, sprung on terms 2 free people chose, with the most dangerous magic any wizard had ever attempted at the heart of it, and holding the door, the one hand in the world Harry Potter had decided to trust with his life. And on the night of the third task, the maze rose green and high under a sickle moon, and 100,000 candles burned in the stands, and somewhere in the dark a man wearing a teacher's face checked the portkey he had laid, and a French dark wizard waited beyond the wards with a bucket and a thread, and a cast-out elder crept toward the ground with nothing left but a lie, and Harry Potter walked to the mouth of the maze and found Fleur's eyes in the crowd silver bright. And the low note sounded once between them, clear and chosen, a struck bell rung at last by 2 hands on the same clapper. Then he walked into the dark to end it. The maze was built to break a champion slowly, and Harry went through it fast because he had not come to win it. He took the hedges at a dead run where he could and cut them where he could not, and the maze threw its winter at him. A blast-ended scroot that he sent into the hedge wall with an ordinary curse, and did not slow for a boggart that wore a dead man's face and that he banished with a flat word, because the maze did not know that Harry Potter had spent the winter learning that there were worse things than fear and had stopped negotiating with it. A sphinx that gave him a riddle he solved at a walk. He was not magnificent in the maze, he was efficient. He had a place to be and a thing to do there, and the maze was only the distance between him and it. He found the center and the cup and Cedric Diggory, who had reached it first and stood now with his hand inches from the gleaming thing, and Harry did the one kindness the night allowed and the one piece of the plan no one watching would understand. Don't touch it, Harry said. It's a portkey. It'll take you somewhere you won't come back from. Walk back the way you came, Cedric, slowly, and you'll have placed second in the Triwizard Tournament and lived, and that's a better night than the one this cup has planned for whoever grabs it. He met the older boy's eyes. Trust me or don't, but step back from the cup. Cedric Diggory looked at the boy who had warned him about the dragon's nature in a corridor and had no reason to lie now, and stepped back and lived, and walked out of the maze the slow way, and that was the last good and simple thing that happened before the world tilted. Because Gaspard Rosier stepped out of the head shadow on the far side of the cup, calm and courteous as ever, and behind Harry the air went cold the way it had gone cold on a Christmas hill, and the tether sunk in the rim of Harry's core drew taut as a struck wire. You came alone, Rosier said. I confess I expected the girl. I had planned for the girl. He glanced once, faintly puzzled, at the dark beyond the maze. But no matter, you are here and your door is closed, and I have only to open it. He raised his hand and the thread between them sang, and Harry felt the bucket begin at last to lower, felt Rosier reach down the binding into the rim of his core to drag it wide, the whole working of 30 patient years coming to its point. You cannot stop this. A core cannot be opened against its owner's will, but it can be drawn slowly down a thread already set, and I set the thread at Christmas, and you let me, and that was the only mistake you have made all year. He smiled. "Open the door, Harry Potter. I am afraid you no longer have a choice." "No," Harry agreed, and his eyes found past Rosier the silver thread of awareness that had been with him since he entered the maze. Fleur outside the hedges where she had been since dusk, her hand pressed to the same place over her own heart, joined to him down the same craft Rosier thought was his alone. "I don't have a choice. I have the only choice that was ever going to end this." And Harry Potter opened the door all the way. He had spent his whole life believing the well in him had a bottom, and the winter teaching himself it did not, and now, with a dark wizard's hook in the rim of him and a girl's hand on the far side of the thread, he stopped holding the door at a crack and stopped holding it at a sliver and let it go, all of it, the whole weight of it. The last opening the account said no one survived, and the floor of him fell away into a dark that had no bottom because it had never had a bottom, and the sea came up. It did not come as a pulse and it did not come as a line, it came as everything. The storeroom of him, the well, the depthless cold ocean that had answered once to a dying child in a burning wood, and once to a dragon's fire, and once to a fool's hand on Fleur's arm, all of it, unthrottled, unbound, rising not into the world this time, but down the one channel that stood open, the thread, the leash, the bucket Rosier had so patiently lowered. The dark wizard had sunk a hook into the most powerful core in the world to draw it out a cupful at a time. Harry gave him the ocean. It went up the thread faster than Rosier could let go of it, because Rosier had spent 30 years building a binding that could not be released once committed. That was the whole genius of it, that the victim could not refuse, and now the genius turned in his hand like a blade held by the edge. He could not drop the thread. The thread was the binding, and the binding had no release, and down it came not a bound boy's stolen power, but a free boy's whole unleashed core, all of it, all at once, the last opening, more magic than any single wizard had channeled since the world was young, pouring into a man who had built himself a cup and asked the sea to fill it. Gaspard Rosier had time to understand. That was the only mercy in it, and it was no mercy at all. He had time, in the half-second before the ocean reached him down his own unbreakable thread, to understand that he had not stolen the greatest core in the world. He had connected himself to it by a channel that could not be closed from his end, at the moment its owner chose to open it fully, and that a vessel made to hold a cupful, asked to hold a sea, does not hold the sea. It breaks. He had time to understand, and then the power he had coveted for 30 years arrived, all of it, and Gaspard Rosier was simply not there anymore, unmade, burned hollow. A binding's bucket asked to be an ocean's shore, gone in a soundless white flare that lit the whole maze from within and threw the hedges into black silhouette for 100,000 watching eyes. And Harry began to empty. This was the part the account said killed you. The door was open all the way, and there was no bottom, and the sea did not stop coming, because the man at the other end was gone. It poured now into nothing, into the burned place where Rosier had been, and behind it came more, and behind that more, the whole bottomless deep of him draining out through a door he could not close, because no one, the account said, no one had ever closed the last opening. You opened it, and you emptied, and you died. That was the price that had always been the price, and a hand closed on the door from the other side. Fleur. Down the thread, through the same craft, the strongest daughter the blood had produced in 100 years, who had broken a working from inside a circle once, and had spent a winter learning the shape of this exact door. Fleur, outside the maze in the dark, with her hand pressed white over her own heart and tears on her face and her whole formidable will bent to one thing, reached down the channel between them and took hold of the door that Harry could not hold and slammed it. It did not want to close. It was the last opening. It had no governor. It fought her the way the sea fights a seawall. But Fleur Delacour had not crossed an ocean and defied her father and broken her people's claim and learned an impossible craft in a cold storeroom to lose him now at the very end, and she set her whole self against the open door of the most powerful core in the world, and she held and she pushed, and slowly, slowly, against everything, the door came closed, the sea stopped, the well sealed. And Harry Potter, emptied nearly to nothing, swaying at the burned center of the maze where a dark wizard had ceased to exist, did not die, because the one hand he had bet his life on had been exactly where he trusted it to be, and had held the door he could not hold, and had loved him enough to slam it shut before he was gone. The tether was ash. Rosier was ash. The binding that had been sunk in the rim of him at Christmas had been the channel of its own maker's undoing, and it was gone, burned out in the same flare that took the man who set it, and Harry stood at the center of the maze, free of it, free of all of it, gray and emptied and swaying and alive. The third hand never got its night. Barty Crouch the younger, wearing a dead Auror's face, had laid his portkey into the cup, and waited at the maze's edge for a champion to grab it, and vanish into a graveyard where his master waited to be reborn. And instead the whole maze had lit from within with a flare that brought Albus Dumbledore over the hedge wall at a run with his wand already out, and the watching stands to their feet, and every Auror on the grounds converging on a center that no longer held a portkey plot but a burned circle. A gray swaying boy, and a cup that Cedric Diggory had been warned not to touch and so had not. Crouch's plan needed the boy gone and unwitnessed. He got a boy at the blazing heart of the most public magical event in Europe, surrounded in seconds by the most powerful wizard alive and a dozen Aurors, with Cedric Diggory walking out of the maze loudly telling anyone who would listen that Harry Potter had warned him the cup was a trap. There was no graveyard for Harry that night. There was no quiet vanishing. The third hand, robbed of the dark it required, made one desperate move toward the boy through the chaos, and Mad-Eye Moody's flask was empty, the hour come and gone in the confusion, and the face that lunged for Harry flickered mid-stride from a grizzled Aurors into a younger and hungrier one, in full view of Albus Dumbledore, who did not miss it, and who had the impostor disarmed and bound on the grass before Barty Crouch the younger had finished becoming himself. Harry had not warned the school and had let the trap stay laid and had counted on exactly this, that a plot built for darkness, dragged into the light by a flare too bright to hide, would unmake itself. He had been right, one night, all three hands, each thinking it was theirs, and the boy at the center, who had spent the whole year being a piece on three boards, had arranged for the three players to ruin one another and walked off the board free. Undine they found at the edge of the wards near dawn, where she had crept to claim the share that had never existed, and she gave herself up to the French Aurors without a fight, because the man who had promised her power was Ash, and the people who had been her whole life had struck her name from the fire, and a witch with nothing left does not run. She would answer to the Enclave and to 2 ministries for a child in a circle, and that was a justice older and colder than any Harry could have arranged, and he left it to the people it belonged to. They let him out of the hospital wing in 3 days, which Madame Pomfrey called a miracle and Harry called the predictable result of a core that, having emptied nearly to the bottom, had refilled from a depth that apparently had no bottom at all. He was, if anything, stronger than before, the last opening having scoured the well wider, and he kept that observation to himself, because the whole point of the year had been to stop being a thing other people measured. Fleur was there when he woke, of course. She had not left. She had held a door across half a mile of dark and then sat by a bed for 3 days, and when his eyes opened she said, "You are an idiot and it worked, and if you ever ask me to hold your life like that again I will say yes, which is the most frightening thing about you." And Harry said, "Noted," and that was, between them, an entire conversation. The reckonings came after, one by one, and Harry endured them because they were the price of a clean ending, and a clean ending was worth a great deal. Dumbledore came and Harry told him most of the truth, the binding, Rosier, the tether, the plan, and watched the old man's face move through alarm and grief, and at the last, a complicated respect, because a 14-year-old who had identified 3 separate plots against his life, and arranged for them to destroy one another, was not a thing the headmaster had a comfortable category for. "You should have come to me," Dumbledore said, and Harry said, "You'd have arrested Crouch and removed the portkey and left Rosier and Undine in the tether, and I'd have spent my life hunted instead of free. I ran it, sir, every way, and mine was the only version where it ends." And Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment and then said, "Yes, I rather think it was. I find I am not certain whether to be proud of you or frightened for you." And Harry said, "Both. Everyone settles on both." It's the correct answer, and something almost like a smile moved in the old man's beard. Seraphine came all the way over the mountains, an ancient Veela matriarch climbing the steps of a Scottish castle to stand before a boy, and she did the thing none of them had expected. She apologized, plainly, fully, on behalf of her whole people. "We hunted you," she said. "I let us hunt you because I was afraid of dying, and fear made me forget what we were for. You owed us nothing, and we tried to take everything, and a daughter of mine had to stand a child in a circle before I would see it. The claim is withdrawn. It was withdrawn before tonight, and I withdraw it again to your face, so there is no doubt. You are no asset of the blood, you never were, and the only thing this enclave will ever ask of you again is your forgiveness, which we have not earned." She inclined her ancient head. "And whatever is between you and Fleur, it is yours, both of yours, freely. The blood blesses it and claims no part of it. That is all I came to say." Harry looked at the old woman who had set a dying people's whole hope on him and then come 1,000 miles to set him free of it, and gave her the one thing that cost him most, because she had earned it by giving up the thing that cost her most. "Forgiven," he said, "not because it didn't matter. Because Fleur's people are going to be hers someday, and I'm not going to let the first thing I ever do to her family be hold a grudge." He almost smiled. "Besides, you raised her. Whatever else the Enclave got wrong, it made her, and she's the best argument for your people that any of you could ever make. So forgiven. Go and be a better matriarch than you were afraid you'd have to be." Seraphine wept, which no one in the Enclave had seen in living memory, and went home over the mountains to a people who would, in the years to come, learn from a cast-out elder's crime, and a young champion's choice how to be free without being a chain, which was, in the end, a better gift than any worthy one's core could have given them, and the only one that lasted. Sebastian Delacour came last, and that one was hardest, because it was a father facing the boy he had tried to leash and the daughter he had tried to arrange, and there was no ministry phrasing that made it easier. He did not reach for any. "I tried to own you," he said to Harry simply. "Both of you. I called it love, and it was not, and I have spent the spring learning the difference, which is a humiliating thing to learn at my age from my own child." He looked at Fleur. I will not ask your forgiveness yet, it is too soon and I have not earned it. But I withdraw entirely and forever any claim, any arrangement, any father's hand on either of your lives. You are free of me in this, and I find," his voice caught, "I find I would rather have a daughter who refused me than a daughter I had broken into agreeing, and I did not know that about myself until you taught it to me, and thank you, Fleur, for being stronger than my worst idea of what was good for you." "In time, Papa," Fleur said, which was not forgiveness and was the door to it, and Sebastian Delacour bowed to his daughter and to the boy and went home a smaller and a better man, and that too was a kind of ending. They sat by the lake on the last evening of the term, on the flat rock where it had started, 2 feet of cold stone between them out of long habit, watching a gray heron work the reeds. "So," Fleur said, "the tournament is over. You did not win it, you placed last, technically, having abandoned the maze to destroy a dark wizard, which the judges found difficult to score." A corner of her mouth moved. "I won it, as I said I would, the one thing here that was mine." "You won it," Harry agreed. "Fairly, I told you our interests didn't conflict. They did once or twice, and we renegotiated." He looked at her. "Every time." The heron lifted off the water and beat away into the dusk, and Harry watched it go and turned over, one last time, the year that had started with a pulse in a burning field and a girl rung like a bell from 40 miles off. He had been a piece on 3 boards. He had been a worthy one, an asset, a prize, a thing to be secured and bound and delivered. And he had walked off every board the same way he had walked through the maze, fast, efficient, refusing the route that had been built for him, and come out the far side owning the one thing none of them had been able to take, which was himself. And one thing he had not expected to own at all, which was this, a person beside him on a cold rock by choice on both sides freely with no one's hand on the scale. "They felt you that night at the Cup," Fleur said quietly. "Every Veela in France. The last opening, it went out across the whole of them the way the pulse did at the World Cup, but this time it was not an accident, and it was not a flood, and it did not find me from 40 miles off and fright me. This time I was holding the door of it." She turned to look at him, and the dusk was silver on her hair. "Do you understand what that means to my people? The first pulse they read as a worthy one breaching, a prize to be claimed. The last one they read as a worthy one freely bonded, his power held in a daughter's hand by his own choice and hers. You did not just break the claim, Harry, you showed an entire dying people what they had forgotten they could be, a breath. They will tell this story for 500 years, and in the story the worthy one was never claimed. He was chosen, and he chose back, and that was the whole of his power." Harry was quiet for a long moment. "That's a good story," he said at last. "Better than the one they started with." He looked at her, and the low note sounded once between them, clear, chosen, 2 hands on the same clapper. "Let's go with that one." He closed the 2 feet of cold stone between them, which he had never done before and would do for the rest of his life. And Fleur Delacour leaned into the boy her blood had recognized and she had chosen. And the heron's ripples spread and stilled on the darkening lake, and somewhere to the south a freed people learned a new song, and the year that had begun with a stolen pulse ended at last with a freely struck note. 2 people who had each refused to the bottom of themselves to be owned by anyone choosing. With their eyes wide open to belong to each other, it was the only claiming either of them ever accepted. It was the only one that had ever been theirs to give, and it was, on their own terms, enough. Chapter 7 End.